Good morning, everyone. So excited that you have joined us again for day 2 of the Real Empowerment Lab and the Student Journalism Workshop. Really excited to start today. It's going to be amazing. We have so much to do, and I'm just going to jump right into it. I'm not even going to waste any of your time because we're ready to go. We are absolutely ready to go. So please engage, as I've mentioned to you all yesterday, if you're able to join us. But this morning and this afternoon, we have 3 master classes for you. And I'm so excited to introduce my colleagues who are going to share their expertise around, in particular, one of my absolute favorite things in the world is to how to secure your bag. How can you turn everything that you're learning in school? How can you turn all of the things that all the skills that you are building in these degree programs that you're in, into actually making money? Entrepreneurial journalism is what we're going to start off with this morning. And I can't wait to introduce you. So do me a favor, throw some things in the chat. Yes, we've got North Carolina A&T jumping in there. I see some of my students. Hey, AD and Brittany, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Super grateful. And I hope you're here not just because I required you to, but because you're really interested in learning everything. Either or, I'll take it. Doesn't matter to me. So excited. If you have questions, comments, feedback, go ahead and throw it into the chat. If you're joining us on YouTube or Facebook, we'll take all of them. And even if you're joining in on Instagram or Twitter, go ahead and send us some of those questions and I'll make sure to get it to you. So fill in there, tell us where you're logging in from, represent your school, little school shout out, represent your school. We like to know which universities are present. I want to take a moment to thank everyone, all of my colleagues, everyone who has participated. We want to give a shout out to, again, all of the people who are watching and joining us on our streaming platforms. I have the pleasure this morning of introducing Jeremy Kaplan. Jeremy is the Director of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at the City University of New York. In his role as Director of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment, he serves also as an adjunct coordinator, implements new faculty development programs, strengthens outcomes, assessment processes, and develops new learning opportunities for students, which is what he's going to share with you all this morning. Previously, before joining that team, he was the Director of Education for the school's Tao Knight Center for Entrepreneurial Journalism. He has taught courses at CUNY in digital journalism, reporting, writing, business fundamentals, and of course, our main topic today, entrepreneurial journalism. He's written for Time Magazine on business, technology, cultural trends. He's covered tech companies, including Google, Yahoo, AOL, if you all remember that company, and Apple. Kaplan was a Uyghurs Fellow at Columbia Business School, where he completed his MBA, and a Knight Baggot Fellow at the Columbia Journalism School, where he earned a master's degree in journalism. He also served as a Ford Fellow in entrepreneurial journalism at Poynter Institute. He is well-versed and knows so much. And I'm really going to stop talking because I want to turn it over to him. And we only have like 50 minutes of his time. So ask questions, engage. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Jeremy Kaplan.
Thank you. Imani, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited to spend a few minutes with you all. I am, as Imani said, a person who's focused on journalism, but also on the future of media and on entrepreneurial journalism, which means rethinking where our journalism future is going, where our media future is going. That's what I want to share with you today. And I'm going to talk about 2 basic things. First, some exciting directions, new directions, how things are changing and being disrupted, both in negative ways and then in positive ways in the journalism sphere. And then I'm going to talk about how do you actually build something? What do we know about how you actually create something new of your own? We're in this moment, which a lot of people have referred to as the passion economy moment. More than ever before, people are starting their own ventures, their own companies, their own armies of one to build newsletters, podcasts, YouTube channels, all kinds of other new products and services around media. And actually, in a couple of weeks, we're launching a brand new program, which is online only. It's for people launching new ventures from around the world. So this is something I'm thinking about every day. Before we get to that, though, we have to acknowledge the moment we're in, which is a shocking and traumatic one for many of us, this pandemic. And the world has radically changed. And as we get going into this topic, I want to just reference how it's affected journalism and media in some significant ways. First, I want to get you involved. I know you're looking at me through a screen from a distance, but I want to give you a chance to interact a little bit. So I have a couple of polls, and we'll see if we can make this work. You can use the QR code, so you can take out your phone and point it at the screen with your camera app open, and it'll take you to the poll question, which is just an opening warm-up poll, which says, what one word would you use to describe how you're doing? You can pick any word you want, and it'll give us a little word cloud to show how we're feeling. And you'll see that show up on your screen once you've entered in your word. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. You can either type in yellkey.com/sit, which is that code on your screen, or if you want to use your phone, just point your phone camera just like that at the screen with your camera app open, and point at the QR code, and that will open. And just type in one word that describes how you feel. I'm going to have a couple poll questions to get you involved throughout if we can make it work. And I do see some responses coming in. So people are feeling excited, fantastic, okay, stressed, exhausted, all of these feelings. And I think many of us feel one thing 1 minute and another thing another minute. So it's just about how you're doing right now. And thank you for participating. And I see more and more responses coming in, and you'll see them on your screen as well. So as we progress, I may ask a couple of other poll questions, so you can keep that tab open on your phone or on your laptop or whatever device you're using, and then you can respond to the subsequent poll questions a little bit later. So even though you're just seeing me on a screen and I'm just seeing my own screen, we can still interact and have some dialogue going here. I am going to move quickly through a lot of this material. It's just a caveat, it's a warning, because I want to share a lot of different things with you, and so I'm going to move quickly. And that's just because I want to get a lot across. But hopefully, if you can take a couple things away from this presentation, that will be more than enough for me. So a lot of people have a lot of different feelings today. Hopefully, at the end, you'll feel like, oh, okay, that's some new thoughts I have to think about the future of journalism and media. So let's move on now. And again, I may come back to the poll question as we progress. Before this pandemic began, I was in New York City with my family, my two daughters who are 5 and 7, Rebecca and Charlotte. And now we're in a completely different world, as I'm sure many of you are experiencing as well. We are wearing masks, we are isolated, and it's a really difficult time. And I'm not just mentioning that because it's a personal concern for me. I'm mentioning that because for all of us, I think around the country and around the world, we're facing new realities, and it's certainly affecting journalism in significant ways. It's affecting, for me, my family, it's affecting journalism significantly, it's affecting teaching. All of our classes at CUNY now at the journalism school are virtual. So I'm not seeing any of my students in person, I'm not seeing any of my colleagues in person. So here I am in my own room, standing in a kind of virtual office space. It's not even a real office. I don't even have my stuff, and I'm sure many of you are on the same boat. And the reason I'm mentioning all this is to give you a sense of how radically things have changed, not just for students, not just for teachers, but for everyone, for the media. One of the things that come out of this for me is a new project. And I think for a lot of you, one of the takeaways I want to leave you with is everyone can create something as a side project. It doesn't have to be a journalistic project. It could be a film project. It could be a 1 second a day video project, or 1 picture a day. A colleague of mine does 1 picture a day on Instagram. I'm sure many of you have various other kinds of creative projects, new journals that you've created. One of my daughters is in a book creating class where they make little paper books, and she's working on her own little craft project each day. I encourage everyone to take up this opportunity, find a silver lining in terms of the pandemic. And if you haven't already, take the opportunity to start a new little newsletter, or to start a little practice podcast, or to make a little video each day, just a 5-second video, or whatever it is that moves you. And this is what moves me, is tools. I'm a tool kind of geek. And so if you're interested in tools, this is my thing, wondertools.substack.com, and I write about tools and stuff that I like and that I use that are useful for creativity and productivity. And here's a little pictogram. Let's get our brains going in a creative way, because what we're talking about, entrepreneurship, is all about creativity and innovation and fresh ideas and looking at things differently. So just take a minute. This is just a little quick exercise. You can just do it on your own. You can do it on a piece of paper. You can do it in your mind. Try to think of a few things that come to mind when you look at this pictogram. There's no right answer here, and there's no wrong answers. And the idea is to move beyond our superficial assumptions about things, about what journalism is, for example, which is what I'm focused on, or what media is, or what documentary film is, or whatever your area of interest is. These are some things people saw when I asked them this recently. And the point here is that we can really look beyond what we assume to be true and find new realities, find new ways of looking at things, new perspectives, and that opens up creativity and an opportunity for entrepreneurship. So I want to talk about a couple things. I'm only going to talk briefly about disruption because I want to get to the growth. What's happening in the journalism world that's new and exciting? There's a number of things. And then a little bit about what's ahead. So lots of things are disrupting journalism, as I'm sure you all have realized during the pandemic. The pandemic itself has forced news organizations to work all remotely. So most of the major newsrooms in the United States, at least, are working remotely, meaning people are in the rooms like me and probably like you. But aside from the operations side of things, it's preventing journalists from actually in-person coverage, whether it's of the election, of the Black Lives Matter movement, of anything that's going on in our country. Most of it is happening at a distance. In addition, it's affecting in a significant way advertising. So that means that more than 40% of news organizations reported that their ad revenue was significantly down in the early days of the pandemic. And many of those organizations were faced with major budget cuts because the sources of revenue that they depend on as news organizations were significantly diminished because companies who were affected by the pandemic were just spending less on advertising. Another major force disrupting journalism these days is the intermediaries. So if we I'll actually open up another poll question here, and this is actually specific to this point. So if you look at your slide, you'll see I'm asking a new question now, which is over the past 24 hours, what news sources have you relied upon? And a news source can be anything, can be any way that you've gotten news or information of any kind. Okay, broadest definition possible. And you can answer in whatever way you want. You can answer with a word, you can answer with a phrase or a sentence. If you go back to that Slido tab that you have open, or just go to yellowkey.com/sit, which is the short link that will take you to that poll. And I'll tell you that what's happened in many cases, and we'll see if this is true in your poll responses, people are using intermediaries. What's an intermediary? An intermediary is another organization, an entity between the reader or the viewer, the listener, and the producer of content of the news. So in this case, in our case, it's generally platforms like Facebook, like Twitter, like Snapchat, like YouTube, and many, many others along those lines. So what's happening is those intermediaries are taking a lot of the revenue along the way, they're taking a lot of the attention, and they're weakening the strength of the traditional news organizations. And note that I say traditional news organizations because what's happening is that the barriers to new news organizations are falling dramatically. And that means new news organizations are flourishing and popping up and cropping up. And I'm going to show you some examples of those in just a second. The cultural attitudes towards journalism is also disrupting the way we do what we do. We've been told by our president that journalists are liars, that they are forces of evil, et cetera, they're not to be trusted. And that attitude, that widespread attitude of distrust towards journalism has actually spread significantly in recent years. And that's affecting journalism and its sustainability and its viability. And finally, technology is affecting how we do what we do and how we distribute what we do in many interesting ways. So there's a lot of disruption happening, but I want to move quickly to what's actually happening on the positive side. So we're seeing a tremendous amount of growth, and we're seeing the rise of independence. These are the armies of one. These are the small independent news organizations that are in many cases filling news gaps around the country and around the world. These are individuals, and I'll introduce you to a few of them momentarily, who are creating new forms of news to fill news deserts, to reach new audiences that have been underserved by news in the past. And the first example I want to mention is the 19th. Just launched very recently. It's focused on quality news by women for women. It's really for anyone, but it's filling a gap in the news ecosystem as perceived by its founders, who are leading journalists from around the country. And as evidence of their strength right from the bat, right off the bat, right from the beginning, they were the first to get an interview with Kamala Harris, the VP after the VP nomination. And it just demonstrates how quickly how quickly new news organizations can have an impact in this ecosystem. This interview would have gone to Time Magazine or to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or some other major news organization in the past. In this case, it went to the 19th News, which is a brand new news organization. Another big news organization is the Markup, focused on monitoring tech and covering tech, not shiny tech reviews of the latest Apple gadget, but looking at how algorithms are shaping our lives and determining what we end up looking at, read, and watching. And they actually, incidentally, just launched something this week called Blacklight, which I highly recommend. I just wrote about it actually in my newsletter yesterday. Blacklight basically lets you put in any website name and shows you how that site is tracking you in various different ways. So if you are someone who uses the web a lot, which many of us are, it's interesting to see how you're being tracked. And they provide a free tool that does that quite well. And it's an example of service journalism. So journalism these days, and increasingly in the future, isn't just about articles. It's not just about news videos or even podcasts. It's also about services like this one, which give you information about your world and customized information for you based on your interests, your needs, your community, etc. Lots of new news organizations. In addition to the Markup on the 19th, there's new local organizations around the country. In fact, there are almost 300 new independent small news organizations that are part of the local independent online news publishers network, LION, which is a national network, which helps demonstrate the fact that there's a vibrant renaissance in local digital journalism. And the Lookout is one of the latest in California along these lines. They're focused on serving people in a community, getting to know people in a community, covering local news in a quality way. They don't have the costs of a print publication or the traditions of a digital local TV broadcast. Instead, they can do something really creative in terms of serving the community with digital products, newsletters, podcasts, local news, quality coverage of local institutions, environmental issues, education issues, local jobs, retail, etc. And they can do a really good job of local coverage because they don't have to do all of the things that traditional news organizations assume that they should do. We've also seen a tremendous rise in podcasts. This is part of the renaissance in entrepreneurial journalism, not just about the coronavirus, and there's a lot about that, but on all sorts of different topics. This is one that my wife and I have listened to recently called Lovesick, about singles, and they essentially talk about the life of people who are single during the age of COVID. There's a huge number of podcasts now in the global podcast database, more than 1 million in the iTunes database, which is what you use if you open up any major podcast player. And huge number of podcasts every week are launching. There also has been a renaissance in newsletters. So more than 100,000 people are now paying for Substack newsletters. That's not those who are subscribing, that's those who are paying. I'm just going to read some of the responses you shared when I asked about the news sources you're relying upon. Someone said alerts on the phone. Someone said, another person said Apple News Alerts. Someone said newsletters, as well as social media. Someone else said the Washington Post, New York Times. A lot of people said Twitter. And those are sources, including news alerts on your phone and Twitter and Facebook, that didn't even exist, of course, as recently as 2006. The first iPhone came out in 2007, July 1st or July 7th, somewhere around there, because I got married that week, and I remember it was about the same time. And so before that, as recently as 2006, we didn't have half of the news sources that you've cited. So that just illustrates the massive disruption in the way that we get news, the way that we access news, and the forces that are impacting news organizations. So back to Substack and the newsletter economy, this is something dramatic and new just in the last couple of years. And not only are people paying for these newsletters, news organizations, new news organizations, news entrepreneurs are now making a living. In fact, this week, Casey Newton left The Verge, a tech publication, to start his own newsletter. Brian Morrissey, who used to be an editor-in-chief at Digiday, left to start his own newsletter. In recent weeks, a number of major journalists, including Andrew Sullivan, left New York Magazine, many others, have left traditional news organizations to start their own newsletters. Essentially, they're able to charge for their own news products and run their own news organization on their own schedule, in their own way, for a community of people who are paying directly to them for what they have to say and what they have to share, not focused on advertising. So one message I want to convey is that the future of news is heavily likely to be heavily reliant on subscriptions, people paying directly for content that is of value to them, rather than just through advertising. Here's another example. This is heated.news. It's one of the best sources of climate change information on a regular basis. It's a newsletter. And Emily, the founder of this, now makes $175,000 on an annualized basis from 2,500 paid newsletter subscribers. So if you think about that for a moment, she doesn't need millions and millions of page views. She doesn't need to reach people on every single topic. She can focus on people who really care about climate change and who are willing to pay for quality information about it a little bit every month, a few dollars every month. And it adds up to a salary that sustains an individual journalist and maybe a small team of collaborators. Now, it's not going to be a scalable billion-dollar business, but that's not what she needs. She wants to be a quality journalist providing quality news to people who care about that subject. And she's doing that quite effectively. And she's not alone. This is another one. PowerPlays.news is about sexism in sports and gender discrimination and gender disparities in sports. And she's a smaller scale entrepreneur at the moment, but she already has 1,000 subscribers. They're paying about $72 per year each. So it's about $6 per month, which is a reasonable amount for people to charge or to pay for a newsletter. That's of great interest to them. And as you can see, that's a significant amount of money for one person to earn as a side project. And pretty soon it might be enough for her to run this as a full-time project as it grows. Other kinds of innovation happen in all different categories. My daughters love The Week Junior, which just launched this summer. And what they identified was that children are an underserved market for news and information. Children are seeing what's going on in the world around them, and they need quality news. I used to work at Time for Kids, which is another kids magazine. And our objective at the magazine was to give children real quality news, not to sugarcoat everything, because kids, particularly older kids, know what's going on and are curious about the world around them. And The Week Junior is doing this in a fantastic way through curation. So they don't create all sorts of original stories. They have some, but they curate great quality content from around the world. So lots of innovation, and something that's happening along with that innovation is new infrastructure for these new kinds of startups. So the infrastructure around entrepreneurial journalism used to be trucks, right, delivering newspapers, or wires, big wires and broadcast trucks delivering broadcast news. Now we have new kinds of platforms that are making it possible for individual journalists and small groups of journalists to sustain themselves as entrepreneurs, as entrepreneurial journalists. These platforms, like Anchor, make it possible for people to create a product basically for free. So Anchor, if anyone's interested in creating a little podcast, and I believe in micro podcasts, which are podcasts that are just a couple minutes, because I don't always have a chance to listen to a half hour or an hour these days, and many of us are in the same boat. But Anchor allows anyone to create a podcast for free, distribute it throughout the world to all the podcast platforms. It's now actually owned by Spotify. Spotify acquired it because it's such a great platform for creating free podcasts. It's really easy to use on the web or on your phone. Substack, as has been mentioned a couple times, is a great platform for anyone to start a newsletter for free. You can distribute a newsletter to as many people as you want completely for free. It's super easy to use. The only way that they make money is if you start to charge, they'll take 10% of whatever you earn. So that's a great way for people to start a newsletter without having to make any investment in it or spend anything. You just have to have a quality idea or have expertise, have a commitment to share something that people are actually interested in for an underserved community. Pico is another platform that allows you to charge essentially for membership or other kinds of revenue depending on what you're doing, like education if you're doing classes or whatever training you're doing. Subtext allows you to distribute news by text message. So that's a new approach that people are taking. And Medium is a great platform for creating a free publication. You don't have to launch your own website. You can launch a publication on Medium, and it's a great way to reach people, and you can focus on just the content, creating the content itself. There are all sorts of new products that are emerging in the news ecosystem. We've talked about newsletters. There are some interesting new apps. There are audio interfaces so that people are creating products that work for Alexa or Siri. There's interesting events that people are doing. That's another kind of new news product. Increasingly virtual events, obviously, now that we're in this pandemic mode. But there's a lot of different kinds of ways of creating new journalism that these entrepreneurs are doing. And a couple of the biggest ones we've talked about, newsletters and podcasts. Data is another big one. Lots of interesting data products. Lots of interesting solo journalists are moving to experiment in new ways. So Carlos Maza left Vox, where he was a very well-known and well-respected journalist, to create his own YouTube channel. And I encourage you to check it out as an example of how an independent journalist can start to make their own path, carve their own path, even on YouTube. And what he does is use a combination of YouTube and Patreon, where people can essentially support his work at whatever level is comfortable for them. And you can see already early on, he had more than 1,000 patrons. So he can sustain himself as an independent artist. Now, admittedly, not everyone has the name recognition that he does, but there are many other artists. I spoke to one this week who was not at all famous early on, but she developed a following with a quality product, and people shared, and people started adding to her Patreon subscription list, and pretty soon she was actually earning enough to sustain herself. And part of that's because people are recognizing the value. Investors are investing in Substack. If we want to look at how the traditional marketplace is now acknowledging this move toward the passion economy. SMS updates that I mentioned earlier, growing dramatically, right? And Subtext is a good platform as an example of that. So there is a silver lining to this pandemic period for the world of journalism. Even as 11,000 journalists have lost their job in 2020 by an estimate that I read recently, even as that is a major blow to the traditional world of journalism, as we've seen, there's a growth in a new world of journalism, a renaissance in the passion economy side of journalism, independent journalism. And that is really exciting. And that's, as I said earlier, why we are launching this new 100-day online-only program for independent journalists from around the world. We had actually applications from 56 different countries. We closed the applications recently. We had an overwhelming amount of interest from 56 different countries because people want to create these new kinds of products and services, and not just create them, but make them sustainable so that they can actually pay their rent, have a sustainable job, basically, career out of this. And all sorts of these newsletters and podcasts have emerged. I won't go through all of these now for the sake of time. It happens not just in these independent organizations, by the way. It also happens at major news organizations like the New York Times, which has innovated with a new cooking app that has a huge number of subscriptions, games app and service that has a huge number of subscriptions as well. E-commerce, they acquired a site called Wirecutter, which many of you may know. They have a daily, which is tremendously successful podcast, and now they acquired Serial, so they have a whole range of other podcasts as well. And a huge percentage was up to, I believe, 40% of the new subscriptions in a recent report to the New York Times were actually subscribers to the cooking or games channel. So the new products are really driving interest in even a traditional news organization like the New York Times. So that means that the ecosystem is starting to mature, and the growth that we've seen in independent journalism is also happening in some corners of the traditional journalism world. And that means revenue, which allows for sustainability. And it requires loyalty. People have to care about the work that you're doing as an independent journalist or as a traditional journalism organization. But you only need a small number of people who really care about what you're doing, whether you're doing documentary work, whether you're doing podcast work, whether you're writing a newsletter, whether you're serving people with text message updates about whatever it is that they need to know about. All of that really requires just a relatively small group of people who really care about what you're doing enough to support it financially. There are lots and lots of revenue streams that people are using to generate revenue. It's not just about subscribing on Substack. It's certainly not just about advertising. In some cases, it's about membership in a community. In some cases, it's about providing services. So a lot of independent journalists have services that they can provide. They can provide custom reports. They can create ebooks. They can provide a lot of different kinds of products and services that help them generate revenue. And they can use their skills. So for video journalists, they can make custom kind of material for independent clients, for example. They can provide training. And this can be all sorts of training. One of my former students from Peru, her organization, which does investigative journalism, provides training to people and how to protect themselves online from hackers and how to protect their privacy online and so forth, because that's something they know really well. And people, particularly organizations and companies, need that expertise and don't have that internal expertise, so they're willing to pay for training. So the journalism organization can help sustain itself by providing that kind of education, that training. Custom content is hugely valuable for all sorts of organizations. And these niche products can happen at the intersection of geography, the local news, micro-local news. It can happen that's specifically targeted towards a demographic. So I have a colleague who created a site for women over 50 as an example, a specific demographic. It can be a psychographic niche. So people who are interested in a specific topic. There's someone who created a site about hockey fights. Who knew that there was enough interest in hockey fights? But there apparently is. So that's a specific interest. But it could also be breast cancer survivors, right? It can be really any kind of specific group of people who have a shared interest in a particular type of content or a particular type of story. These are ways of specializing in new areas. The Marshall Project is a good example, which is focused on the criminal justice system. Or the Trace, which is a new news organization focused on the gun issue in our country. So there are lots and lots of organizations that are focused on a very specific kind of a niche. So I want to pause and see if there are any questions thus far, or if you have any questions at the moment. We've got a little ways to go, and I'm going to shift gears now and talk about how you actually create something. We've seen a lot of examples of growth and examples of entrepreneurial journalists, and we've talked about the sustainability and the revenue streams and how the platforms that people can use, you can use. But I want to get into a little bit more about how you actually create something in entrepreneurial journalism. And so, but I do want to just give you a moment to see if there are any questions. And while I'm doing that, I'll also pause to switch the poll question. And this is a very simple one. The poll question is, do you lean toward being optimistic or pessimistic when it comes to the future sustainability of the quality news ecosystem? Okay, so you can answer that question. And it's a simple one. Lean towards being optimistic. Things are going to work out well. The major news organizations and quality news will survive and thrive in the future in one way or another. Or the trends, on the pessimistic side, the trends illustrate that people are more distrustful. They're less likely to consume quality news. News organizations are laying people off, less likely to survive than they were before. So that's a quick poll question. And you can also think about this question: how do you define entrepreneurial journalism? Which I'm going to talk about in a second. So I see that we're leaning towards optimistic, those responses so far. And I certainly am optimistic, but maybe that's because that's what I have to be, right? I have to help people find a place in this new future. That's my job. But I am optimistic. I think the new technologies that make it possible for anyone to create something, and also our new consumption habits, where we're not reliant on just the major networks, for example. We can find whatever we want to watch on YouTube or Netflix or Amazon Prime or wherever we watch things. We can listen to whatever podcast we want. And that allows for a flourishing of new ideas and new voices. In this recent period, we've learned a lot about how a lack of diversity has affected our country in so many different ways. And one of the ways in which we lack diversity is the diversity of viewpoints that you have easy access to and regular access to in terms of media consumption. So the faces in a traditional news organization, I worked at Time Magazine, where almost everyone was a white male or a white female in some cases, but less at the executive level. And very few diverse voices of people from different backgrounds, not just ethnicities and religion, but also professional experience. We didn't have policemen, former people in the military, or doctors, or scientists. And so we lack diversity. Now, if you open up the podcast, your podcast app, or if you look for a newsletter, you can find newsletters from anyone, from any ethnicity, from any race, from any gender, from any religion, from any sexual orientation, any profession. So we have a greater diversity of voices. And I think that's a great thing. And international voices as well. It's super important for us in a largely US-centric media culture. It's hugely important for us to have international voices that we listen to through podcasts, through newsletters, through news websites, etc. So I'm glad to see many of you are feeling optimistic. I recognize some of you are feeling a little bit pessimistic, and both views are appropriate and justifiable. Okay, let's move on. There is a question. Let me see if I can take that question. What defines a true fan compared to a regular fan? I talked about 1,000 true fans. Does it depend on your level of engagement with your product? Yes, I think that's a great way of thinking about it. If someone is just a passerby, right, and there's lots of websites we just pass by and look at something, we move on, right? We're not a true fan of that particular website or that particular news organization. We just happen to stop by, much in the same way you might pass by a store and grab something or grab a coffee once, but it doesn't mean you're a loyal customer. So I would say if you're a true fan of someone who comes back multiple times, so they're not just a passerby who passes once, and they actually know and care about who the organization is or who the creator is. I think if you have those two things, if somebody subscribes to your newsletter and understands your voice or cares about what you do in some way or listens to your podcast more than once and cares about who you are and understands who you are, and the third characteristic would be someone who's likely to or might share with someone else. Because if they're doing that, if they're a champion, if they're an advocate of your work, then they are a true fan. That's not to say that all true fans are advocates. Some maybe just listening to their thing and not sharing it. But in many cases, true fans care so much about what they love that they will share it with other people. So those are a few characteristics of a true fan as opposed to just, a passerby or someone who doesn't care a lot about it. Thank you for that question. And if others of you have questions, feel free to chime them in about 10, 15 minutes before we wrap up. We'll spend a few minutes with some final questions again. But before we get to that, let's get into a little bit more about entrepreneurial journalism. So I asked you what comes to mind, and maybe you've had a chance to think about it. Let's dive into what I think it's about. It's about developing new ventures, and I've given you some examples of that. It's about a living laboratory for what's next. So recently, some news organizations have allowed you to subscribe to calendars. They're distributing news through calendars. So we all use email, so newsletters make sense, but we also use calendars. Many of us use Outlook calendar or Google calendar or some other calendar digital. So imagine being able to subscribe to a calendar that gives you information on a topic of interest to you through your calendar, maybe events and updates on that topic. That's an interesting example for experimentation, right? SMS messaging, news through SMS, where you can respond to the journalist and ask a question, right? Or subscribe to a particular topic that you're interested in. It's also about new business models. So I've mentioned different revenue streams. Traditionally, journalism has been funded by two things: subscriptions, right? Paying for content, and advertising. Now, in this new era of entrepreneurial journalism, it's supported by 50 things. It's supported by membership. It's supported by subscriptions and advertising, but it's also supported by education. It's supported by all sorts of custom services, custom content, e-commerce, and so many others, as I mentioned earlier. So entrepreneurial journalism is about exploring that, exploring new business models for news. It's also about serving the information needs of underserved customers. So a lot of people in this country do not have a local publication. A lot of people do not have publications that speak to them in their voice or represent them in their community, both geographically, demographically, psychographically, etc. So this is really the definition that's most important to me. It's about sustainably serving the information needs of underserved customers, creating new news products and services that serve people who haven't been adequately served. And there are a few key things that we talk about in the world of entrepreneurial journalism. Product, so what are you actually making that's of value? Community, who are you actually serving and how do you reach them and how do you grow that community? So if you start a newsletter today, you'll have one person who's a subscriber, yourself, maybe two if you're one of your parents, and then your friends, and you get up to 10. But how do you get to 100? And then how do you get to 1,000? That's been a challenge that I've been working on over this, is building my own newsletter. How do I build that? How do I grow that? And that's been something I've been learning about and enjoying exploring. And that's true of a lot of journalists, entrepreneurial journalists all over. Sustainability, how we actually make money. So these are the three key things. This is true of entrepreneurship in general, but it's also true specifically of entrepreneurial journalism. So we think about it in these phases. And a lot of people think you do everything and then you launch. And there's a big launch day and you launch at the end. And we don't see it that way. I don't see it that way. You launch early on. So first you do some learning. So what are people actually reading? What are they actually consuming? What's interesting that's out there? What do I know about this community? What do I know about this topic? What am I personally passionate about? What am I knowledgeable about? What am I excited to share with other people? And what might I provide of value to the world or to this particular community? That's the learning phase. And the next phase is launching. You put something out there. You create a 1-minute little podcast segment, or you create a 1-minute little video that is a prior step to creating a whole documentary, right? Or even a mini documentary or whatever you're creating. You create something little, and that's the launch. And you put that out there and you get responses from people. And you learn what's interesting and what's not, what questions people ask, what they want more of. Then you grow. You improve the product, you develop the product, you start to grow a community around what you're doing, even if it's just a few friends or a few colleagues. Then you eventually, at some point, once you've got a product and once you've got a little community, then you can start to think about the revenue and how do you sustain this. And then eventually you think about, how do I run this? Do I need teammates? How do I make this a part of my regular life, either as a side project or even as a full endeavor? Then you think about shifting. What do I need to adjust? Nothing's perfect in any project in any early phase. There's lots of adjustments. You're continually making adjustments and shifts. And then eventually the story might end with an exit. And one thing I encourage you to do, if you are at all interested in entrepreneurial journalism, is to start with your own strengths. And I think of it as the SKIN kind of framework, S-K-I-N. So your skills, what can you do with your hands? So you can code, or many of you can shoot video, or edit audio, or you can translate from one language, from Arabic to Chinese, or from Spanish to Portuguese. So what you can do are your skills. That's your hands, right? Then your head, what do you know? Maybe you know a lot about the history of your local area, or you know about what it feels like to wrestle with mental illness, or you know a lot about a particular topic of whatever kind. That's knowledge. That's the brain part. Then what's in your heart? What interests you? Or what's your passion, right? What do you really want to wake up and think about and do and create? And finally, your network is really important. If you have a particular network, that's going to help you build whatever journalism venture it is. I would encourage you to play with this, to experiment with this, to write this stuff down. What do you want to learn more about? You learn by actually creating something, by building something. That's one of the biggest benefits, even if it doesn't take off, even if it doesn't reach a community. When you're thinking about opportunities, I like to think about them in these three key areas, right? What are your capabilities? And we just talked about that. Also, look at a community. What's a community around you that has needs, that's underserved? Again, it could be a local community, a geographic community. It could be a demographic community, or an ethnic community, or a religious community, or a political community, or any kind of community. And what are the problems that they're facing? What are the needs that they have? What are their goals? And what are trends that you're seeing in that community? I'll give you one example. As a new dad a few years ago, I felt like a lot of the content out for parents was for new moms, understandably. But I, as a new dad, was hungry for content. I was very eager for new kinds of content that helped me learn about being a father in early days of parenthood. And Fatherly is an example. That's a project that emerged because they identified that. They identified that there was a community of dads like me who really care about fatherhood and want to be good dads and want to learn about parenthood and fatherhood. And yes, we'll read mommy blogs and read about mom stuff, but we want some stuff aimed at dads as well. So that was a venture that worked on addressing a community's needs. And finally, a catalyst. So sometimes something happens like the pandemic, and that can serve as a catalyst for new kinds of projects and new things that are going to happen. When the election happens, whatever the result is, there's going to be a world of people frustrated, some people excited, but there's going to be an opportunity for some new kinds of news products and services that address that particular moment in time. And one of my former students recognized that in 2016, Trump was elected, and started What the F Just Happened Today, which grew to one of the biggest newsletters and sites covering the Trump administration. And it has hundreds of thousands of subscribers. And he's one person, and he started that because he saw a moment in time where there's a need for curation and simple summary of what happened today. So we have to start with real people. I'll skip over this because we don't have time for the details. But essentially, we're thinking about these key questions. Is something I'm interested in creating desirable? Do people actually want it? Can I actually do this? Is it feasible? Is it viable? If I do this, is there some path toward making some money at some point? And is it compatible with my values? Do I really believe in this? Does this speak to my heart? As journalists, as journalism innovators and media innovators, there are new sets of skills that we need. So if you're a journalist, you need to be able to write and edit and interview people and fact check. Those are the eternal verities of journalism, the quality skills you need as a journalist. And then as a video maker or a podcaster, you need similar set of skills as well. But in journalism innovation, we need product skills, creating a product that has a feel and explanation for people, that reaches people in a way that makes sense to them. We need to have an engagement skill to basically engage people in our content on an ongoing basis, to reach out to them, to make them aware of what we're doing. We have to have sales skills to be able to get people to pay money at some point, whether a sponsor or a subscriber or a member. We need some sort of special expertise, typically, to stand out in whatever area it is. You have to be willing to take the initiative. No one's going to serve it on a platter for you. And finally, we have to have self-awareness to know what it is that we can do well and what it is that we might need some help from other people. Within journalism, we have a new skill set as well. We have to understand business a little bit. We have to think about curating information. Just as museum curators curate the best art, we have to curate the best of journalism, not just create it. There's great material around the world that we can bring to our readers through curation. And we've learned in terms of entrepreneurial success, these are some numbers from our program, which has been a very diverse, I would say, in my view, successful program in helping people launch over the years. Our entrepreneurial program, we've served people from many, many countries around the world, more than 30 countries and more than 130 people. And we've learned a few things. They've launched all sorts of projects, from Narratively and Skill Crush to How India Lives in India, NK News, one of the world's leading services about North Korea, lots of projects they've created. And what we've learned is that there are, I'll skip over their individual testimonials, that there's endless paths to doing this. It can be as simple as using text messages to listen to people. This is a listening post project in New Orleans where people could text in information. But ultimately, it's about starting with a tiny objective. So I encourage you, if you're interested in creating something, start with a really tiny objective. Focus on specific pain points that people have. They need information about X, Y, or Z. Or there's a beautiful story to tell about this particular person or topic that hasn't been shared. And put it in front of real people so that they can actually see it. The journalism ecosystem is changing in so many dramatic ways. We have giants like the major international players. We have verticals focused on narrow individual specializations. We have watchdogs doing accountability journalism. We have local sites that I mentioned earlier. We have platforms like Facebook and Apple and Twitter and Snapchat creating their own content, distributing their own content. We have curators. We have specialists. So there's a huge new ecosystem that you can be a part of as an independent. And you can take advantage of these new kinds of categories of distribution that we have through the internet, through social media, through mobile. We're able to reach people around the world quickly, with ease, as frequently as we want, right? Through whatever channel you want, whether it's creating a podcast, a video, a newsletter. There are fewer tech barriers. It's cheaper to launch. We can access markets around the world. You can do this. You can create something today and start reaching people around the world. It's happening all over the place. People are launching things, and you can be one of those people. If you are already one of those people, you can help other people do it. There's a strong demand for new information. People are looking for new videos to watch, new newsletters to subscribe to, new podcasts. They are getting overwhelmed in some cases by information. So it's important that you offer something that's distinct. But in this era, we went through the era of launching online. We went through the mobile and social era. But in this era, we're really focused on new business models. So one of the key questions is, how can you as an individual or as a small team find that right business model? And that's a lot of the challenge. That's a lot of what we think about and we work with people to do. There are some key challenges up ahead, and then I'll stop for questions in a moment. One of the questions is about consolidation. So a lot of, on the major news organization side, about 2 major hedge funds now control about 50% of the newspaper distribution around the country because they've bought up a lot of the major newspaper chains. So how will that affect quality news in our country? Are people going to get tired of subscribing to 10 different things? If you have a Spotify subscription and an Apple Plus subscription and a Netflix and an Amazon Prime and a Hulu, and if you have so many subscriptions and newsletter subscriptions, at some point are you going to grow tired? Are people going to grow tired of subscriptions? And here's my thought on this. I think we're going to see more bundling. I think you're going to subscribe to, let's say, Netflix and get a bundle of newsletters of your choice or podcasts of your choice with that subscription, right? You're going to subscribe to Spotify and you're going to get some custom podcasts along with that. You're going to subscribe to Apple Plus, and Apple just announced a new bundle, and you're going to get some news, premium news access as well. So I think there'll be bundles even within the podcast sphere, within the newsletter sphere, within the YouTube sphere, et cetera. And that may happen through membership or subscription. The new political era, that has a lot of open questions. I won't get into that today. You'll hear enough about politics elsewhere, but that will affect journalism, and that's going to affect independent journalism as well as traditional journalism. Can we have events in person? Events were a major revenue stream for a lot of news organizations, and now they're all virtual. How will that change in the next years? Will 5G affect what we can do with news and information distribution? There's some amazing possibilities that tech makes possible. Will people in other countries access different content, whether it's in China and Russia or elsewhere? Will we have a splinter net where different people are accessing different content and different news? And finally, what's the role of philanthropy? So journalism may require support from philanthropic donors, from organizations, from universities, from individuals, because in my view, it's a public good. Just like we need safe roads and clean air and clean water, we need quality news in order to engage in civic life. We need to know what's happening with the pandemic. Where is it spreading? What are the dangers? If we don't have quality news, we risk having a disengaged, disinformed, misinformed society that's disengaged from politics, and all sorts of awful things can follow from that. So we need philanthropists, in my view, to step up. Just as they support environmental organizations, just as they support educational organizations, they need to support, I think, journalism organizations, and many are beginning to do so. And so I think that philanthropy will have a role, particularly in the realm of public service journalism, accountability journalism, covering the State House, covering local issues that are undercovered, environmental, education issues, etc., investigative issues, international issues. So I want to thank you for listening, for participating in this session through the polling, and I want to invite you to email me if you have follow-up questions, to follow me on Twitter at Jeremy Kaplan if you're interested in the kinds of issues I've been talking about. I want to also invite you to share any final thoughts. I've switched the poll to a final thought. If you want to share a final thought through the poll about this session, about anything that's on your mind now. I also want to invite you to subscribe to my newsletter if it's of interest to you. If you're interested in tools, I've written recently about Notion and about Coda and about Typeform and all sorts of cool tools. New presentation app. So lots of cool stuff that's emerging for media creators, for independent journalists, for anyone who's interested in new technology and creating new things. So again, thank you for listening, and I hope I have a chance to engage with some of you in real life at some point. When we're back in real life. And Imani, thank you for having me here, and it's been a pleasure to speak with everyone. And if anyone has final questions, we've got a couple minutes here for some final questions. So I'm happy to hear your final questions, or as I said, you can share your thoughts in that poll, yelki.com/sit. You can share your final thoughts there if you'd like, and I'll leave that open afterwards. So if you have a thought after the session, feel free to add that thought. Anything that's come to mind in your ideas, something you're interested in asking me, or something you're interested in sharing with others, any of that is welcome.
Jeremy, thank you so much. That was amazing. So helpful. All the tips. Really, really grateful for your time. We're really excited. We're going to keep moving this morning, but that was awesome. I will say just one quick question for you before I let you go. Where do you get your news?
Yeah, I use a bunch of different sources. So I use some traditional sources.
You have a top 2 places that you find is a great place to get, credible, interesting, engaging, and exciting news.
So I'll give you a couple answers to that. There are different realms. In podcasts, bit.ly/podcast faves is my 50 favorite podcast. So I can't name one, but I rely on podcasts for great information, whether it's Ear Hustle about the prison system, or
that's one of my favorites.
Intelligence Squared is a great podcast which has deep debates about quality issues. So there's many of those. Planet Money is great on kind of anything having to do with economics. Traditional media, I like the New York Times and the Washington Post. I think they have quality news on a daily basis. The Wall Street Journal has quality business information on a daily basis. On the TV realm, I'll be honest with you, I don't watch TV news very much. I don't find a lot of quality TV news. I think that's a realm where we need more quality TV news. I think there's quality documentary work, which is on YouTube and on Netflix and on other channels. But I think local TV news, in my own personal experience, my personal view is not quite up to the par of the podcast sphere, of the digital news sphere, of the newspaper sphere that I mentioned. So so that's what I do listen to, and that's what I do consume, and also quality curators through social. So through Twitter, I find a lot of quality curation, people I respect who are curating things that I might not have seen. So to get out of my filter bubble.
That's good. That's good. That's really interesting to know. If I had a little more time, I'd definitely say I would. I got some more questions there around your thoughts on local news. So yeah, we'll talk at some point about that. But thank you, Jeremy. So engaging, so amazing. Super grateful for your time. Take care, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks everyone.
All right. That was kind of awesome. I don't know about you all, but I definitely took some notes, and I have some great tips for my own teaching and my own classes. In particular, those surveys. Those surveys I thought were an amazing tip to just maintain engagement, to really find out what you all are thinking, which is ultimately kind of also what we're here about. The March on Washington Film Festival. It's such an honor to be here to help lead their educational content. And I am just grateful that you all are taking some time on your Friday mornings to join us. So well done, Jeremy. Thank you. So we're going to transition into our next masterclass. I'm trying to use other words than excited because I feel like I overuse that term a lot, but it's so accurate. It's so accurate in the way in which I just can't wait for it to hear more. I love documentaries. My students know this, my friends, my family. I'm obsessed. I think they are such beautiful forms of the genre, and they can be everything from empowering and exciting, like most of the things that you'll see in the festival this week. They can also be obviously educational and thought-provoking. And now we're going to have a moment and we're going to talk with a really amazing impact strategist. And we're going to have she's going to lead us in and have a discussion around the way in which you can learn about just impact work, and how in particular with documentaries and feature films, she does a lot with, nonfiction films, but the way in which you take a finished product, you take the film and you look at all the ways that films don't just live in one dimension. Right? We don't just go watch a film and then we talk about it with our family and our friends, we engage, discussions, we might share, our feedback on social media. But our next presenter really focuses on the way in which you can take a film, talk about, really dissect all of the ideas, all the feedback, all of the rich nuances of these amazing stories, and really dig a little deeper. So Lindsay Geschow of the Ray-Ban Group, disclaimer that the Ray-Ban Group is also our parent company here or parent organization here at the March on Washington Film Festival. But Lindsay is the principal in the group's Impact Entertainment division. She brings over 15 years of experience in building campaigns for films, nonprofits, philanthropists that drive meaningful and measurable change. My students always know I'm talking about engagement. How do you engage? How do you measure that? The heart of Lindsay's work ties at the intersection of storytelling and social impact. As a film campaign director at the Malala Fund, Lindsay developed the strategy and ran the global #with Malala campaign using He Names Me Malala to advance the movement for girls' secondary education. Engaging over 1.3 million young people in screenings and campaign programs, #with Malala has helped shift education policy in Nigeria and Pakistan, and raised over $3 million to support the Malala Fund programs in developing countries, trained close to 1,000 girls in advocacy and leadership in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nigeria, India, and Kenya. She previously served as the Senior Director of Marketing and Strategic Alliances at Participant Media, developing and supporting impact campaigns for films such as Waiting for Superman, one of my favorites, Teach, Middle of Nowhere, A Place at the Table, Last Call at the Oasis, The Help, Misconception, Promised Land, and Ivory Tower. She has worked as a social impact agent at Proper Daily, helped launch the Cool Globes Public Art Exhibition in Los Angeles and Copenhagen, and helped build the Strong Global Warning virtual March campaign with Senator John McCain, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and producer Lori David, where she also worked with the Impact Campaign, supporting another one of my favorite films, An Inconvenient Truth. Lindsay was a recipient of Self Magazine's Women Doing Good Award and has been featured on The Today Show and contributed to pieces for the New York Times, Time Magazine, Glamour, and Elle. She has served as a guest lecturer on social entrepreneurship at Pepperdine School of Business, and she's a UC Davis graduate. She's based in Los Angeles, so I'm super grateful for her getting up early this morning. But she always remains with passport ready, traveling as often as she possibly can. So I'm so excited. Thank you so much. I'm going to welcome Lindsay to our presentation this morning. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for getting up early on the West Coast and joining us. Coffee. Amen. I've had a cup and a half, so I'm with you on there. But thank you so much, Lindsay. We're really excited to hear your feedback and to share all the amazing things. You have roughly 50 minutes. I'm going to stop talking because you have a lot to share and say. So jump in. I'm going to go off. I'm going to be moderating the chat on Facebook and YouTube. So thanks to everyone who's still here. Stay engaged. Great stuff coming. See you soon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cheers. And hello to everyone. I'm really grateful to be here in conversation with you. Hopefully we'll have some time to do some Q&A. Would love to hear your thoughts on this work. But in this moment, just want to send love to everyone. It is a really crazy and traumatic time in our upside down world right now. So sending love and strength to everyone as we are getting through this work. And I feel now more than ever the value of art and storytelling to use as an advocacy tool, as a driver to create change is so incredibly important. So very excited to chat with you today. And I'm going to jump into these slides and see if they work. Bear with me, friends. Okay, there we go. So first and foremost, as Dr. Cheers shared, I work at the Rabin Group. If you don't know about us, we are a progressive public affairs agency based in DC. We have offices across the country. We work with nonprofit organizations, foundations, good corporate citizens on their work to move this world in a more just and humane direction. I work in the impact entertainment practice at the organization. We work with filmmakers, we work with artists, philanthropists, media companies, really thinking about how we can use storytelling as a tool to shift narratives in our country and globally, change culture, and ultimately influence policy in a more humane and just direction. So a little more about me. Dr. Cheers sort of gave you my background and bio, but I have sort of had a winding path to find myself in this impact work that I'm doing. I always say to young people and students, I think the most important thing, and older folks as well, that we can do in our life is really to follow curiosity. You don't have to have a set plan, but if you follow things that you're interested in, that spark your interest, it will lead you to where you need to go. When I graduated from UC Davis, I was a communications major. I moved to Los Angeles, wanting to work in the entertainment industry, having no idea what it was all about. I ended up working at a talent management firm. And really got to see the underbelly of the inner workings of the industry. Was not totally for me. I decided to leave. I worked at a few marketing agencies and ultimately decided that I wanted to work in the nonprofit space. I wanted to be of service and spending my days and hours doing something where I could contribute. My first sort of role in 2005, I was working at a campaign called Stop Global Warming. We were doing a virtual march on Washington. This was pre-social media, and really thinking about how we could bring the issue of global warming to the forefront in public consciousness. So it was no longer, at the time, no one was really paying attention. It was older white gentlemen speaking about the issue, and it really wasn't resonating. We weren't sort of moving collectively together as a society around this very important issue, which remains at the forefront today. So our thought was, how can we infiltrate pop culture? How can we bring this issue to the masses in sort of unlikely ways, using unlikely messengers? So we partnered with athletes and actors and musicians and good corporate citizens and policymakers across the aisle, from the local level all the way up to the federal level, to really start talking about climate change. We got, Oprah to do a first hour-long special on climate change, which was kind of unheard of. We got NASCAR to come on board and talk about climate change. We got wineries talking about the impacts of climate change, and actors and celebrities and whoever, Curb Your Enthusiasm did an episode on climate change. So it was really, at the time, my boss was producing An Inconvenient Truth. We were starting to see movement and really get people engaged around the issue. But when that film came out and we were able to reach millions of people at once, it was kind of a game changer for us. We used that film as an advocacy tool. It was embedded within school curriculums. And that really changed my path professionally, really understanding the power of compelling, great storytelling as a tool to move action, to create action and move peoples to change their minds, to change their behaviors, and to ultimately impact policy in a more just and humane way. So that's just a bit of sort of background of me and where I'm at and how I got this start. That was a really sort of profound experience for me, and I kept going down that road, thinking about how I could use art and film and storytelling as a tool in this work. So there's just a few of the films that I've worked on in the past. Everything from sort of narrative films to documentaries are my sweet spot, the same as Dr. Cheers. I love documentaries. There's so much value in sort of bringing people into real people's experiences and putting them in their shoes to develop empathy. I love this quote from Toni Morrison. I think of us sort of as artists and storytellers. We're the arbiters of culture. Stories truly do have the power to fuel movements, and art reflects our times, and the times reflect our art. So now more than ever, in this completely upside down world that we're living in, we need the artists to go to work and really fuel this movement and share the stories that are happening on the ground day in, day out, to build this empathy and humanity and move us, in a humane direction. So how do we do this work? How does it work? Why does it work? This is just a broad overview of our methodology. We talk a lot about narrative transportation, and that's really the idea that when an individual is just lost, completely immersed in a story well told and or transported into, this narrative world, their real world beliefs might start to be affected by the experience of the story. Their psychological barriers, sort of reduce, and the story then becomes this powerful tool for persuasion and belief change. Neuroscientists have absolutely studied the effects of powerful storytelling on our brain chemistry, and there's a shift. There's a rise in cortisol and oxytocin that makes us more likely to take action. So that's sort of the underlying theory of change around all of the work that we do. And then there's this thing called narrative accretion. And that's the idea that the more stories that you're exposed to around a specific topic or issue, they collectively add up to your experience around and thinking around a specific issue, and that is the sum is sort of greater than the individual parts. And over time, as you build upon and are exposed to more stories around specific topics, they contribute to an ongoing dialogue and might shift your perspective and the action that you take around a specific issue. So that's kind of at the root of how we think about this work. and the theory of change of why it actually sort of impacts people from a neuro level. And this is just a quote: when a person's placed into and immersed into a world of a story, the narrative transportation implies that once a person is lost in the story, so to speak, then not only do their attitudes reflect the story, but their intentions may do so as well. There we go. That is a photo of some work we were doing in Bihar in India. We were doing a ton of work with young girls and advocates across 5 countries within our campaign that we were implementing around the Hineni Malala film. Always love to see that picture. So let's talk a little bit about your impact vision. When you're talking about creating a campaign, you really want to define your vision. That's kind of the critical first step. And that's really sort of going to be your team's lighthouse, sort of North Star guiding light to lead the way. For a film that I'm working on right now that I'll talk a bit later in the presentation, the film is titled All In: The Fight for Democracy. It features Stacey Abrams and leaders in the voting rights space. It just came out about a week ago. It's available on Amazon Prime, so I hope you all will have the chance to check it out. It is a truly extremely powerful and important story around the history of our voting rights and disenfranchisement in this country. But when we were doing this step and thinking about the vision for our campaign, using this film as the central tool to build our campaign around, really our efforts, we wanted to have this North Star around in the United States changing culture around civic engagement by celebrating and fiercely protecting the right to vote for all Americans. So when you're thinking about this North Star vision, the sort of first step in your roadmap as you're developing an impact strategy and campaign to support a story, you want it to be clear, really, a concise 30 words or less. That's something that's extremely clear to your funders, to your partners, to the filmmakers, to anyone when you're sort of giving that elevator pitch of what you're up to in this effort and why. It will require little to no, further explanation. You want it to be compelling. So it's inspiring in and of its own right, this vision that you hold for this effort that you're undertaking. And you want it to be a bit outside your comfort zone. You want it to be sort of a stretch. I know that sort of within the time frame of this campaign we're working on right now for All In, we probably will not shift our entire culture and get everyone on board with the idea that we fiercely need to be celebrating and protecting our, fundamental rights in this democracy. But if we can sort of take steps to get there and fuel the movement that has existed, we will be doing our job. So that's just a bit on the vision. The next step that I think you absolutely want to be thinking about is a strategy. We can't get anywhere without having a solid, sound strategy to work from. So it really is this kind of dance between the film and this campaign that you're creating around it, and the movement that exists and the activists that have been on the ground doing this work. You're in cohort 100% completely with them. You're not sort of operating in this outside silo. So what we like to do in the impact space is usually start our efforts as we build a strategy with a brain trust. So we would bring together leaders and experts within the movement and issue space. Within this brain trust, we like to do it as early on as we can. Sometimes filmmakers allow you to do it when they're still in production and don't have a final film, but they'll let you show some clips or let you show a rough cut. are certainly sort of once it's done, make sure immediately to get it in front of folks within the movement space. I think this is a time to have conversations with those that have been doing this work day in, day out, for years, decades in some cases, to really understand the issue landscape. You want to sort of see where those tipping points are, where you can be useful and additive in the work. You certainly want to find out, what would be prohibitive or anything, that is out of bounds. You definitely don't want to bring harm to anyone within the movement. You just want to be additive and help bring fuel to the movement. So a brain trust is a really great space to be able to garner intel, to really think about how this film can be a tool to the work that's happening, find out collectively what these movement leaders need support and help on, that a film can help sort of bring that energy and excitement and a different audience to the work that they're doing. So those are just some things that you want to be thinking about. Within your strategy, I think ultimately, absolutely, you want to be thinking about who your audience is and how this film can most effectively engage with those various audiences. Most times there's multiple audiences that you're trying to target. What does this audience already think about the issue? Where does this issue sit within the zeitgeist already? How is it being spoken about? Is there legislation that's currently being talked about? Is it absolutely kind of nowhere on people's radar, and this film is going to blow the can wide open and expose people to something that's been sort of hidden within our society? Like I said before, what do the campaigners and movement leaders need in the issue? What are the pressure points that the film and collectively the energy, excitement, press, community that you build around it, what can they help sort of push over the edge if there are pieces of legislation or structural change that's kind of right at that tipping point? How can you be useful and additive in that way? And what do our audiences need? What kind of tools and resources do they need ultimately for real change to happen? So those are just some key things that you want to be thinking about as you're developing your strategy in cohort with movement leaders, in partnership with them, always, always, always. So when we're thinking about building a strategy, there are 4 impact dynamics that I focus on. I think they kind of shift and vary a little bit within kind of our field, but these are the 4 that I feel are the most important. So when we're thinking about what kind of change and how we want to create change, I go to these 4. Are we trying to change people's minds by bringing just mass awareness and understanding to an issue, creating a shift in kind of public attitude and narrative around a specific issue? You want to think about what kind of attitudes and beliefs you're trying to actually change. The second kind of dynamic that you'd be focused on is thinking about changing behavior. How are we actively mobilizing people to do different things, not just think differently? Redefining how they see their role in our culture, and whether that's volunteering, taking the time to go do something, to volunteer to support moving this work forward, whether that's boycotting something, whether that's donating to an organization, really taking it a step further from changing their perceptions, to actually doing something, changing behavior. The third impact dynamic that we focus on is really about community building. So how are we as a campaign and the film building capacity within the existing movement? Are we bringing more folks in? Are we bringing more funding and resources to these organizations to go further and farther in their work? Are we helping to create coalitions of partners that may have come together under this impact campaign that may not have been working collectively together before? An example of that I have is when I was working on Food Inc. We were trying to reauthorize the Childhood Nutrition Act. And a lot of the nonprofit organizations that were working in the space had not sort of collectively come together to push under one big tent umbrella around this specific issue. So through the film campaign, we were able to bring these partners together to leverage kind of this moment within culture and the excitement around this film, which was exciting and shocking to us, and use that to collectively bring these partners together to push forward the Childhood Nutrition Act, reauthorizing that. So yeah, that's building communities and grassroots capacity building is a really incredible and key feature in the work that we do. And then finally, the sort of final impact dynamic that we focus on is changing structures. So how are we changing things from the top down? Are we changing policy? Are we pushing our community that comes in through the film around a specific piece of legislation in cohort with our partners and movement leaders? Are we changing how businesses operate? Those are sort of the big structural changes. And when you're thinking about your campaign, sometimes you're working with all four dynamics. Sometimes you're laser focused on one or two. You know, for example, you could be focused on changing structures. There's a piece of legislation. We're going to take this film, directly to the policymakers and key leaders that need to sort of have this in their face and be confronted from a human level about what this issue is doing to individual citizens. We're going to build sort of the grassroots support around this issue to get folks pushing up to the top to help create sort of that policy and structural change. You can be very sort of laser focused on one thing, or you might be trying to touch multiple impact dynamics across your campaigns. So for example, on the Stand With Malala campaign, it was a massive beast of an effort. It was the most amazing and incredible project that I have been a part of, but also one of the most challenging. I embedded myself at the Malala Fund, Malala's organization. It's always so, I have to stop. It's always so lovely to see a picture of her. She's an incredible human and was my boss as a 16-year-old. It was amazing to be of service to her and in service with her. Anyways, we had this massive effort in the global north and certainly North America. We had very different priorities from the actual campaigns, individual campaigns we were running in the global south. In the global north, we were very focused on changing minds and changing behaviors and changing structures, policy around girls' secondary education. We knew in the global north, those folks were the primary donors to fund this organization. And so we were targeting budgets within the US, within Canada, across Europe to get folks to make additional funding commitments. In addition, we were using sort of our audiences, we were working collectively with our audiences across North America to raise their voice and petition the Global Partnership for Education to expand their mandate from 9 years of education to 12 years of education, which over 1 million people were raising the alarm and sounding the alarm bell on that. And ultimately we won and we got that embedded. We took that a step further and were able to embed 12 years of secondary education within the SDGs. They were just at 9 years, but this sort of collective energy we were able to bring around that very specific issue of expanding from 9 years to 12 years for funding, recognition, and tracking evaluation within sort of the highest global structure. That was a huge win for the campaign. And we were also fundraising, changing people's behaviors, getting them to recognize that this was a massive global issue, that 130 million girls were out of school and did not have access to 12 years of free, safe education. So getting folks to dig into their pocketbooks, not only were they raising their voices, they were donating, and ultimately we raised a little over $3 million to support Malala Fund programs moving forward, which was a great win. On sort of the opposite side, in the Global South, we launched 5 individual campaigns in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nigeria, Kenya, and India. we did that in partnership with leaders on the ground. We dubbed the film into local languages. We worked with local voice actors to actually dub the film in local languages to make it accessible. We knew they, in some of the communities that we were working in, folks were illiterate and did not have the ability to read and would not be able to read subtitles. So we had to have the film dubbed. We worked with the national education coalitions in each country to develop an advocacy strategy. And then we brought together a cohort of partners in each country to really lead and run the campaign. They certainly, obviously, know the cultural context and what was happening within the community. And we had some really great sort of wins on the policy side, specifically in Nigeria and Pakistan. We created a program where we used the film as a tool and starting point to bring young girls together and develop these girl advocacy groups across all 5 countries in the different states that we were working in. The film was the spark to show girls Malala's story. A lot of them didn't know who she was, but saw themselves in her. And then we followed that up with local community partners, training these girls in advocacy, communication, leadership techniques, plugging them into the national level advocacy work. And these gals just went off like wildfire. It was really incredible to see how they took this work and made it their own. They were doing radio programming across multiple countries, I think we reached close to 13 million homes with our radio programming that the young girls did. They were advocating at the highest level, at the local level. They were literally in India, girls were going door to door, knocking on doors, talking to brothers and fathers, which we found to be some of the highest barriers for young girls being in school, talking to them, encouraging them to re-enroll their daughters, their sisters back into school. And in one state in India, these girls were able to re-enroll 1,500 girls. We specifically targeted men, fathers, brothers as one of our key campaign programs because we knew they were this great barrier to entry for young women and girls. So we knew we needed to get them on our side, and seeing Malala's father within the film and how he was so supportive of his daughter and the value of education to the family and ultimately to the community. It was a great tool for us for our partners on the ground to start having these conversations with men in the community and to see the behavior shift, the mind shift. That was really incredible. So we were working across all 4 sort of impact dynamics within that campaign, within our multiple sort of smaller targeted campaign efforts in each country. So there's some of the, which I sort of talked through, the results of the impact there. So once you sort of have your vision and you have developed a strategy, for your campaign, you want to think about crafting a call to action, thinking about once the film is over and folks are sitting there in the theater, watching it at home, watching it on their screen, and they ask, my gosh, what am I supposed to do? I want to be part of the solution. How can I affect change? You want to have a very clear and concise call to action. You want it to be specific. You want it to be collective. You want it to be impactful. You want it to be measurable, and you want it to be plausible. So when thinking about your call to action, you want to think about always, always, always. We are in cohort. We are in partnership with the movement. How can our call to action, the 1 to 2 to 3 things that we are asking people to do once they are fired up, once they are in that place of narrative transportation, once they have had a shift in their brain and their hearts and minds are changed and they want to do something, where can we plug them in that will actually add value to the movement and the ultimate goals around this issue? The second thing you want to be thinking about is certainly when the film ends and somebody asks, how can I help? What do? You want to have a very clear call to action to say, this is exactly what you do. This is exactly where you go. We've pulled together all the tools and resources for you to do this. Make it a very low barrier to entry. And then what kinds of engagement and activities do we need to execute to be able to realize that call to action? What tools do our partners need, or do they already have, that we can utilize so we're not reinventing the wheel? We're not sort of starting a new nonprofit with every film campaign that we run. We want to be able to plug into what already exists and figure out where to accurately plug people in. So that brings me to a film that I'm working on right now. Like I said, it's called All In: The Fight for Democracy. Lisa Cortez and Liz Garbus are incredible. I'm lost for words. They're amazing human beings. They are doing beautiful work in the space of documentary film. Lisa Cortez, one of the directors, just won an Emmy last week for her documentary, The Apollo. Liz Garbus has been Academy Award nominated for all kinds of different films, but they are truly best of the best, and it's an absolute honor to be working with them on this project. We came into this project from kind of the beginning while they were still shooting the film. They shot this film literally from soup to nuts within 1 year, which is a bit unheard of in the documentary space. Films can carry on for quite a long time, but they wanted to have this done and out ahead of the election. It was great to be able to work in sort of cohort with them, to give them advice and thinking about sort of the ultimate impact and the stories and individuals that would need to be included in this story to reach our ultimate impact and vision and goal that we had for how this film and piece of art could be used in the world as a tool. So it was great to be in cohort in having conversations around the filmmaking piece. That usually is not the case, but that was an honor to be able to advise on that. But ultimately, we helped develop the strategy for this impact campaign and are now implementing this effort. So our call to action around this film is to register to vote, to make a plan to vote, to mobilize your community, and protect the vote. 4 sort of very clear things. We are working with a massive consortium of national partners and local partners to do this. So many of our partners like Rock the Vote and Vote.org, Headcount, When We All Vote, had incredible tools. So we did not sort of reinvent the wheel and go out and build our own things. We white labeled and pulled from our partners and are using their tools. We created on our website, there is a voting action hub that has all the tools and resources that folks need to register to vote. To make a plan to vote, we have access to information so folks can see what's on their state ballot, to request an absentee ballot, to look up where their polling place is, to look up when their early voting date is, so they can truly make a plan. Am I going to vote early? Am I going to vote absentee? Where is my polling place? We need everyone to have a plan in this election during this crazy time. And then to take it a step further, create kind of that ladder of engagement around action. We have opportunities for folks to mobilize, not only to bring in their friends and family to text and get them engaged in making sure that folks are registered and have a plan to vote. We have tools for folks to do that. But we also have partnerships with organizations so folks can plug in and volunteer to be a poll worker, volunteer to be a poll monitor, join our partners at When We All Vote and become a voting squad captain. Those are their volunteers in communities that are doing registration and sharing information so folks can get out and vote safely in their community. And then finally, one of the most important pieces is really sharing the tools around how to protect your vote. Certainly in this chaotic time when there's so much misinformation being sowed about the voting process, we want to make sure that we are sharing accurate, crystal clear information so everyone knows their rights, what they need to do on election day, early voting day, with their absentee ballot to make sure that their vote is 100% protected. So when we were thinking about the strategy, we sort of narrowed it down to 3 buckets as we're working on this campaign. The first is kind of from a national perspective, and we're calling that Rally the Vote. And that's really how can we bring in sort of a wide audience through the film into this campaign, thinking about sort of the marketing efforts of Amazon Studios, who has released this film, and all of the touch points and different audiences that we're going to reach. How do we bring them in to take our actions and get engaged and move up the ladder of engagement? But a big part of this was really listening to our partners in the field, and all of them being concerned with the amount of misinformation that's being propagated about the voting process. So how can we be supportive? What can we bring to the space that would be additive in cohort with these movement leaders and partners? We're storytellers. We have access to incredible creators. Let's create a groundswell of content that is sharing factual information on a daily basis. Let's work with our partners to develop really compelling, action-oriented storytelling for them to be able to share out with their community. So that's a big component of our Rally the Vote. And then also, how can we use sort of culture and culture levers to bring people in and share this factual, accurate information? And so one of the programs under the Rally the Vote strategy is we have a 50-state ambassador program where we're working with cultural influencers, athletes, musicians, folks sort of across the space to adopt a state and then share the actual factual information about voting in that state, key registration deadlines, early voting deadlines, where and how to access your absentee ballot, when to send it in. These folks across these 50 states will be sharing and propagating that information out to the masses from now through the election. The second sort of strategy is, we're calling that the ground game. So really thinking about how we can target, we're focused in 10, I'm calling them battleground states, 10 states where we can go hyper local and focus on building capacity and supporting movement leaders at the local level. We know sort of as a value that the greatest change we're going to have as a country is going to start from movements and community grassroots levels. So how can we support these organizations and folks that are working day in, day out, not just around sort of registering and mobilizing voters? They're working in their communities to build political power around the key issues that folks care about year round. And then they're converting sort of that energy and community to certainly use their political power when there are elections from the local level and federal level, national level, to plug in and make their voices heard. So we have raised philanthropic dollars, and we are giving out grants to organizations in our 10 battleground states to really help build capacity in the work that they're doing so they can go further and farther. And then the sort of third strategy that we have that really goes back to this vision around changing the culture around civic engagement and voting in this country is really focused on young people. And we know that this is an absolute long tail effort. Things are not going to change within 5 months, 1 year. But this is something that we can leave as a legacy effort of this work that we're doing. And that's our Grow a Voter educational program. So thinking about really trying to shift the paradigm from mobilizing young people once they turn 18. We've done a ton of research and have learned that these young people, are not on any of the candidates or parties' rolls before they turn 18. So they're usually not communicated with. The voting process is confusing. It's confusing to all of us. So really thinking about how we can reach them well before they turn 18 and folks are trying to mobilize them, to shifting the paradigm to growing voters from a much younger age. So we've developed standard aligned curriculum and lesson plans, and the film is a tool, thinking about how the film can be used as text in the classroom. All of our lesson plans have a media literacy component because we want that to be sort of rooted in everything that young people are learning. but that is something we've been working with teachers across the country. We have a teacher ambassador program where we're training the trainer and training teachers on how to use the film and these tools in the classroom to really center civic engagement with the next generation. So that's kind of a very broad overview of what we are up to in the All In for Voting campaign. Again, I highly encourage you guys to check out this film. It's absolutely beautiful. It's infuriating. It's inspiring. But it really does give a great overview of the history of voting rights in our country and sort of collectively how we have come to this moment in time of voter suppression and disenfranchisement that continues in this country. So that is it. That is it. I'm going to pop back here, and I don't know if there's any questions that folks might have for me. Otherwise, would love to connect and always am available to answer any questions and be helpful in your journey as you're thinking about this work moving forward.
Wow, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have a couple of questions. I'm moderating the.
Otherwise,
I'm looking at the chat and I'm just sort of seeing some other things. But I would love to know sort of personally, what has been one of your favorite, and I know, I think I already know the answer and you probably talked about it, but like, the most rewarding, you mentioned the Malala and how just deeply rewarding that was for you. Is that your favorite film that the Impact campaign you've developed, or are there other ones that sort of stick out over your career that just you were like, wow, this is why I do this work?
Yeah, I mean, the Malala project, Stand with Malala, was an incredible campaign. I think specifically what was so rewarding, it was incredible to raise awareness and funds and move the work forward on a policy side and awareness side here in sort of the global north, but the work that we did in the global south, so many of the partners that we worked with had never used storytelling as an advocacy tool or an engagement and community building tool. So really getting to kind of train these folks in this work and know that they saw the value in it and saw how incredible it was to create that change within their communities and structures, and knowing that that would be continued forward in the work, for years to come. That was so incredibly valuable and just a great experience. I would also say, an Inconvenient Truth was a really interesting experience because we had built sort of this grassroots movement.
Yeah.
Pre-social media, friends.
Right.
That's how we were kind of using these different messengers. But the fact that we had built this community that was actively engaged, it was, a couple million folks that were actively engaged within our campaign. And then to sort of see the film come out and the light switch turn on of how this community could really jump in and use this film as a tool in their local communities, at their schools, in their local governments, that will always be sort of the starting point for me.
Absolutely. That is truly, I can't speak of, that's one of the first films, that I saw that really had me challenging like my everyday life, like the way in which, and again, this is a film I like to remind people with An Inconvenient Truth. This is a film that's 20 years old.
I know.
And when it had me, like, I vividly remember I was a sophomore in college at Washington University in St. Louis. And it was just one of those kind of really eye-opening, like, oh my gosh, we got to do something. And then to see how a film that we're still seeing the amplification, like that issue is still very, very important. Climate change is very, but it's one of the original films that really sort of, spurred this additional conscious movement around environmental justice, which is amazing. We do have a question from Facebook before you go. Are you concerned about these groups that you were trying to reach not turning out this election due to the complicatedness with mail-in voting and everything going on with our current global pandemic?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, truth talk, it is a crazy time. We all know that. I think what we have found in our conversations with movement leaders and all of our partners that we're talking with, I think sort of the initial rush was to say everybody needs to, mail their ballot in, absentee vote, and what we heard from these organizations was, no, we need to be sharing messaging of more options, not less. We need to create more opportunities. So if you are comfortable and able to, we are going to share exactly how to request your absentee and send it in. If not, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, and if you're healthy and able, go and vote early if that's available in your state. If that's not, then make sure you're there early on November 3rd. But creating sort of your backup plan. If you are mailing in your ballot, track it. If for some reason it wasn't accepted and you're aware of that, make your plan to vote early if that's available. If not, make sure you're there on November 3rd. I mean, I think it is a crazy time, and we are collectively in this fight with our movement partners, and certainly Stacey Abrams, one of the key leaders who's featured in the film, just trying to share accurate information, trying to keep people calm. I think, the instinct is to panic and get overwhelmed, but we want people to remain calm and make a plan and give them all the tools and resources that they need to do this. I think given the injustice of where we are as a country in this moment and everything that is collectively happening, the energy around making sure that your voice is counted and holding our leaders accountable for their actions from the local level all the way up to the president. I certainly have not felt this energy in my lifetime. I'm hopeful that the energy we see in the streets, people will take it and march on the ballot box and go make their voices heard. We know it's not a perfect system. It's a hot mess system, but we need to have our voices counted. And then we need to spend every day after the election holding these people accountable to create the systems and world that we all collectively want.
That's great and so important. And even just one last question from Connor. Thank you, Connor, for engaging one of my students. Appreciate it. In your opinion, what's the best way to encourage someone who's on the fence about voting that they should this election based on your work in particular in the organization? So what do you, and I will say, I don't know who these people are still on the fence about voting, but if we'll just say that there are some people right now who are hesitant, and I'll just go with that. Maybe hesitant, not necessarily on the fence, but people who are hesitant. What do you think is the best way to encourage people outside of what you just said, which is make a plan, right? Make a plan.
I mean, that is like voter suppression working perfectly. They collectively wear you down to the point where you think, you know what? It doesn't matter. These people don't reflect me. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to vote. Or they may have had an experience in the past where they tried to vote and they didn't have the right ID or this, that, the other. That is voter suppression working exactly as it was designed and intended to. It's meant to wear you down. You get to the point where you think, it doesn't matter. My voice doesn't matter. That is what they want. Yeah. The only way we are going to combat voter suppression is with mass voter turnout. Good. And then we change the system. We work to create a just system. Good. But that voting is one part of your advocacy, right? Like we are marching, we are signing petitions, we are fundraising, we are supporting movement leaders, we are in the streets. And then you have to take that extra step to make sure that your voice is counted in this way. Otherwise, our government, you're saying pretty much saying to our government that I don't matter, you're not accountable to me. Right? You didn't hear my voice and you're not accountable to me. So you can do whatever you want. Yeah. And that's no longer the case.
No, it is not. Lindsay, thank you so much for everything. We are going to wrap up and actually take a 5-minute break. 5 minutes. 10 minutes is too long. Y'all won't come back. 5-minute break. really quickly before we go into our last masterclass of the morning. But Lindsay, I just want to thank you. Thank you so much for the work that you do. Thank you for your time this early on this Friday morning out in LA. For those who were wondering, as you mentioned, the last film that Lindsay discussed, which is called All In, we are featuring this film with the March on Washington Film Festival tomorrow, Saturday, September 26th. So please make sure, check out all of the details. We'll have that link in the chat, but please make sure you watch that film. And after you finish watching the film, make sure that you and your loved ones have made a plan to vote. Okay.
Yeah. Go to allinforvoting.com to get all the resources you need.
Absolutely. Right there, allinforvoting.com. We're going to make sure we pin that in our chats as well so everyone knows. Lindsay, thank you so much. Have a great Friday and a wonderful weekend. Be safe.
Thank you guys so much. Grateful to be here.
Thank you. All right. So welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for staying with us. We're going to wrap up this empowerment lab and this student journalism workshop with one of my favorite topics, I won't lie. Outside of making money, which my students know is my real favorite topic, the one that is super close to my heart is about finding a mentor. And it's such an important topic in this industry in particular, in storytelling and journalism and filmmaking, is finding someone who is a little ahead of you, maybe a lot, who you can actually learn from, who you can bounce ideas off of, who can help you navigate through some of the challenges that can come through this industry. Also, someone who can cheer you on. So it's not just only helping you with the challenges, it's someone who can cheer you on and support. And I'm really fortunate to have a friend of mine, a colleague. She's an amazing, amazing, amazing content creator, storyteller. And it's just such an honor that we have some of her time today. And I think one of the special things about her in particular is that we had one of the same mentors in Gwen Ifill, in the late Gwen Ifill. She was an icon. For those who, you all should know who she is, but for those who don't, look her up. She's an icon, and both the next presenter and I had the pleasure of calling Gwen Ifill a mentor and a friend. Shireen Stanford is the Director of Content Strategy at WPSU, responsible for developing and implementing the strategy for the station's original productions across digital, radio, and television. She is also a moderator and an on-camera host for many years. She was a journalist, producer, director, and writer, spanning her career across print, web, TV, and of course, independent film. Shireen is the past chair of the PBS Digital Media Advisory Council. She is an interviewer and a host for radio program Take Note, and a moderator of the Penn State Forum Speaker Series. She was a 2016 Next Generation Leadership Senior Editorial Fellow and a 2011 CPB and PBS Producers Academy Fellow. Little fun note, that's actually where I had the opportunity to first meet Shireen. And Shireen, myself, and one of our panelists from yesterday, Grace Lee, we actually all met in that same Producers Academy back in 2011. Before working at WPSU, she worked on several projects with her filmmaker icon, Albert Maylys at the Maylys Films in Harlem, New York. She was the production coordinator for the Election Roadshow series for Washington Week with Gwen Ifill, as I said before, her friend and mentor. Her work has garnered four Mid-Atlantic Emmy Awards, a George Foster Peabody Award, a signed Golden Eagle, Pennsylvania Association of Broadcasters Award, and several other Mid-Atlantic Emmy nominations. Her productions include the multi-platform series Women in Science Profiles and Water Blues Green Solutions, the television documentary series Holding History, and As Long as We Dance. She is a powerhouse, and she is definitely a legend in her own right. Shireen is going to talk to us about mentorship and how do you find the support for a successful career. Shireen, I'm going to bring her on now. Hi, friend.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good to see you. I love that red on you. You look great.
Thank you. We're bringing the primary colors today, so I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Shireen, thank you so much. I am going to step off of the screen and follow up, moderate. As you're asking questions, I'm going to be helping pull in some of those answers and feedback from our streaming platform. So thankfully, and thanks to everyone who's still here, stay with us and get those questions going. So I'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. It sounds like you guys have had a great couple days already. So as Amani mentioned, I am really passionate about mentorship. It's one of those things that it took me way too long to realize just how important those relationships were. And so that's why I spend a lot of time talking to people, especially young people, about mentorship. I want to shortcut a lot of the things that I had to learn kind of slowly for you guys. And as Imani mentioned, you know, she and I shared a mentor who I'll talk about a little bit later, but those relationships really are key to your success. And I want to, you know, I'm going to go through some slides, but I really want you guys to feel free at any point to share your questions so that I can kind of be incorporating the answers throughout the presentation. So, you know, I think when people think of mentorship, it's one of those things that I always want to be clear about why it's so important. And there's a lot of really good information on mentorship out there, but Harvard Business Review in particular has been kind of a guiding force for me in terms of like how I think about mentorship. And as you can see, it's very clear that people who have mentors just perform better. You have a better career experience. And so I always want to make sure that people understand that from the beginning, because I think I was one of those people who thought, I'm just going to work really hard and prove to people that I am, you know, worthy of moving up in my career or, you know, of getting these accolades. But the truth is that when people say that, in particular, this industry, this media industry that a lot of us are in, is about who you know, I think I kind of didn't really believe that 100%, but it's true. And that's not to say that what you know isn't important. It's very important. But who you know is also can be really important as well. And so if you're like myself, who, you know, my family isn't well connected to anything. We're actually, you know, I'm an immigrant to this country. So I didn't have those connections naturally. So you have to work a little bit harder if that's the case and build those. And so being thoughtful about cultivating those relationships at the same time that you're building technical skills, at the same time that you're, you know, learning your craft is really important. And one of the things that I like to focus on is, you know, the role of the mentee, because a lot of times I think people really focus on the mentor, and that's really important. But a good mentor-mentee relationship only works if the mentee is just as invested. It cannot be the kind of thing that you decide like, oh, I'm gonna go find this person and make them my mentor and get recommendations and get them to help me if you're not willing to put in some of the work yourself. And some of these guiding principles, I think, have been really helpful. One of those is knowing what you need and are looking for, because that's going to help the person that you are wanting to be your mentor know, one, whether or not they're the person for you, because they may not have that expertise or they may not have the time to devote to what you need from them. But also, it's going to help you be clear about your own goals. So, you know, I've seen situations where people just approach someone, including myself, and just be like, yeah, I just, you know, I'm looking for a mentor. But that doesn't really help me. It doesn't help the mentor really know what the expectations are or what you're looking for. And just some of the other points, you can see the points on here, but some of the things that I want to really highlight is this idea about your role and over delivering. I think a big mistake that people make is thinking about what the mentor can do for them and not thinking about what they can bring to the relationship. And we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. But for me, and I've heard mentors say this a lot, these are really busy people and they don't have to mentor you. Some people, it's part of who they are and part of what they want to do. But it's always going to be extra, right? Like they're always going to be taking time away from something else that they could be doing. So there has to be something that they're gaining from it. And sometimes it's, you know, seeing a lot of potential in you and feeling like they want to contribute to that. And sometimes it's, you know, there's definitely been cases where it's like they want to be the one who discovers the next big thing. And so in those situations, if you know you're dealing with someone who's really busy, you do not want to be wasting people's time. You do not want your mentor chasing you down. You want to be the kind of person that they want to be helping. And I think that that's been something that has been just something I've been paying a lot more attention to. I have, you know, a few mentees, and the ones who sort of check in often and who aren't, you know, who I know more about and I understand what their goals are, I'm in a much better position to be able to help them than if I don't know, if I'm not clear about it because they're not clear about it. And we'll touch on this point as well a little bit later too, but so sometimes things don't work out, but the worst thing that you can do is when something goes wrong to just disappear. A friend of mine who studies mentorship, you know, you'll see it on a later screen, but talks about ghosting. Like, you don't want to be ghosting your mentor. One of the things that Imani just mentioned, and it's 100% true, is that this industry, no matter what part of media you're in, is small. I promise you. And there is nothing more valuable than your reputation. And so if you know that you're having a tough time with someone, it's okay to be honest about that and to say, you know, thank you for your time. This has been so great. And to just make sure that you're in good relationship with people, because you do not want, you know, one thing where, let's say it's a program that you are assigned to a mentor, those aren't always necessarily going to work out. So you want to have the kind of reputation that you handle situations. And so that's something that I really try to preach, because it's really easy for it to happen. It happens all the time, but it's not something that you want to be part of what people know you for. I just saw that I have a question about how do you know it's time or necessary to get a mentor? That's a great question. And so here's the thing. You know, I'm speaking very formally about mentorship as if it's always this like very thoughtful process along the way. But what has happened for me has really been that the relationships have been pretty organic. And so my first answer to the question about how you know if it's time to get a mentor is it's always time to have a mentor. I think that mentors are important at every stage of your career. So, you know, I'm in a senior leadership position at my station. I have several mentors. And we'll talk a little bit about that, you know, having more than one mentor is also a good thing. So I would say if you know that you have particular goals about positions that you want to get to, if you know that you are interested in, for example, having a good life balance so that you have work and you have a personal life, that is also something that a mentor can help you figure out. So to me, at any stage in your career, you need a mentor. You know, I moderated a panel the other day with the CEO of a company. She has mentors. So it's not the kind of thing that at some point, you know everything, and so you don't need mentors anymore. It's the kind of thing that I would recommend you want pretty early in your career and you want to continue. And those people will change. Sometimes because you kind of grow into positions. There's someone who was my mentor at one point, and now we're at the same level, but she's still in different places where she can be helpful to me and I can be helpful to her. And so we talk about, you know, some of the issues that we're dealing with. So that's a great question. And my real simple answer is that I think it's always time for you to have a mentor, no matter how early on you are. I think that as soon as you really kind of understand what some of your goals are, even if you're not sure, because that's what mentors can actually help you do, is help you figure some of those things out. So it's always important to have a mentor. The other thing I wanted to talk about is this idea of sponsorship, because it's a little different than the way that we think about mentorship. And it's really, really important. And I don't think I figured this out until about, I don't know, a year ago or something. But sponsorship is about, so mentors can be, as you can see from the screen, you know, mentors can be at any level. You can have someone who is helpful for different parts of your life and your, you know, career. Sponsors are really people who are at a very high level. They are in rooms and spaces that you don't even know exist because of the position you're in. They're going to meetings that you don't even know are meetings. And mentors, and so mentors are valuable. And, you know, some people talk about sponsors as a type of mentor, which maybe that's true. But sponsors really are invested in seeing you succeed. And the only way that they can do that is if they know what your goals are and what you are interested in. They cannot effectively, you know, advocate for you if they're not clear about that. And for myself, and I do want to talk about some of my personal experiences too. For myself, there were people who were sponsors for me that I didn't know were doing that, who saw potential in me that I didn't see. Like if you had asked me a few years ago if I would be in like management, I'd been like, absolutely not. I'm making documentaries. That's what I do. I'm making art, like no interest in being in meetings or board rooms or any such thing. But other people saw that in me and put me in positions to experience those things. And that's what a sponsor can do. They can also help you focus your vision. You can see here, you know, about your career vision. But sponsors are really well connected. And so a sponsor can do something like, oh, you know, when they get approached to do a big presentation, they can say, you know what, I'm not available, but I know a great person who could fill in for me. And that is, I think, one of the most important roles that a sponsor can play. There's someone who just retired, who I am just eternally grateful for conversations that he was having about me that I had no idea. And there are people who, when they hear about jobs, they put my name forward. And I don't know that that stuff is happening. And, you know, when we talk about mentorship, that mentors need to feel like they're getting something out of it. Sponsors often don't get anything out of it. I don't even know sometimes who is putting my name forward for things. But they are people who really care about you, are invested in your future, think a lot of you, and are willing to put your name forward and to have those conversations with people that, like I said, it's not even like I wasn't in the room. I didn't even know there were rooms that existed where people were having these conversations. And I see a question from Isabel on Facebook about how do you approach someone about being your mentor? It's a great question. It's a question I get a lot. And there are different ways. So I think sometimes formal mentorship programs are good starting points. If you have no idea, you know, I have benefited from being in like fellowship or leadership programs or things like that, where they assign you a mentor, or, you know, I know of different organizations that have just mentorship programs. So if you really don't know where to start, I think those are good places to start. The other thing is, I assume that there's students on this, is that some of your first mentors are your professors. That's how you start building your networks. A lot of universities hire people that they know are well connected in whatever industry it is that you're studying. So they are banking on those people, your professors, being connected to people that can help you and being those people who can help you. So there's a thing that I used to always tell students about, like, go to your teacher's office hours, because you're not going to get to build relationships or know your professors in any way if you just show up to class necessarily. So formal programs, starting with people that you just automatically are in contact with, like, you know, professors. And also if you're already working, so one of the things that I would do is think about what it is that I would want to do or try or seemed kind of interesting to me, and look at the people who were doing those things. And sometimes they're within your organization, and a lot of times they're not. And so being creative about that, you know, I joke with people sometimes. I know there are people who, you know, will sort of cold email people from, you know, on like LinkedIn or something like that. That's another thing. Make sure your LinkedIn profile is like good and great, because recruiters are always looking there first. That's a side note. But so I do know people who have, you know, just reached out in a way that's just like, I found information about you on the internet. That's a little harder to build from, but I do know people who've had success with that. I think thinking about people who are close to you in some way. So aside from, you know, people you work with or people that you can look up and see and you know, see that they're doing something that you want to do. I also think about people who are doing things that are similar to what I'm doing, that I meet at conferences. And I know a lot of stuff is virtual right now, but it still gives you the opportunity. Before I go to a conference, I look to see who's speaking. I look to see who's going to be there. And do you know what I do? I look them up and look up their backgrounds, and I see if they've done things that are, you know, something that I'm interested in. And if they are, then I can reach out to them, or I make sure that I meet them in person, or in this case, you know, online too. You can do that. So those are the ways that I've found success, and then I've seen other people find success. I think the ones that work the best, no matter how they start, are the ones that at some point you just realize you have a connection with. And there is some sort of like, okay, it's not like I've ever sat someone down and been like, I would like you to be my mentor. You know, would you serve in that capacity? I most certainly didn't do that with Gwen Eiffel. I happened to work with her. But it's, you know, but it's one of those things that people realize what that role is. And sometimes you do need to formalize it. There's situations where you do need to formalize it and say, hey, I'm going to check in with you, you know, once a month, and could, you know, is that okay? Can you set aside half an hour for me? And that's another good way to do it. I see a question here that Samantha wants to know, what are some best tips for keeping in touch with mentors? Another great question. So here's the thing. If you're a very organized sort of person, what you should be doing is sort of just checking in periodically. I love hearing from my mentees. It's really helpful for me. It doesn't mean that we have to talk on the phone. Sometimes they'll just send me a quick email that says, hey, just want you to know I'm working on this new project. It's really great, and I'm learning all these new things. In other situations, you may need to set up a formal, as I was just saying, you know, meetings with your mentor, especially someone who maybe is someone you don't know as well, not someone you're going to see all the time. It's perfectly okay to ask them, you know, do you think you have time? Could I check in every quarter with you to just let you know how I'm doing? And Samantha, I'm really glad you asked that question, because it's one of the things that it's sort of a pet peeve of mine, the opposite of that, which is I only hear from people when they need something from me, like a recommendation or something like that. And maybe I haven't heard from you in a year. And I'm like, well, what am I going to write? I don't even know what you're doing. And so I think depending on the relationship, if it's someone that you see often or someone that you can, you feel comfortable just setting up a more formal check-in process, I think that works really well. And maybe that's how you start. And then later on, you know, there are people that now I'm close enough to that I will just send a text that says, hey, just want you to know I got promoted or something like that. Or, you know, a quick email. These people are busy. So a quick email that says, hope you're doing well. Just wanted to check in and see how everything was going, and then give them an update on you. And I encourage people to do that before you need something. I encourage people to do that just because you are invested and you do care as much about your mentor as hopefully they do about you. So that's a great question. And that actually leads to the next thing I want to talk about is really hitting home this idea of reciprocity and thinking about what you can give, what you're adding to the relationship, being responsive. So Samantha, you talked about, you know, being in touch with the mentors, but also, you know, if they write to you or give you a call, then, you know, you should also make sure that you're replying to them as well. And then this next slide, this idea about feedback. And this is why, again, I think it's important to think about the different kinds of mentors you can have. I'm going to give you an example of this feedback. So there's a senior producer that I worked with. I ended up just, you know, being really close with her, and she's written tons of recommendations or been a reference for me lots of times. But in the beginning, I, you know, was going to be applying for jobs, and I asked her to look over my resume and to give me feedback. And she shredded that thing. I mean, red ink everywhere, right? Like you could barely see what I had written because everything was, you know, edited so much. And, you know, my little ego was hurt, maybe my feelings were hurt, but it was incredible because what she showed me was how someone at her level, when they're looking for people to hire, she's like, we don't have a lot of time. So I need to be able to scan this resume. Like you can't make it hard for me in any way. And I took that and applied that to that resume, future resumes, and really took that to heart and do that for several other kinds of things. If I'm sending something out and I think it would be helpful to talk through it with a mentor, I do that. And I listen really closely to their feedback. It's not like you're always going to necessarily agree. There's some things that you might just say, you know, this is core to who I am. This is what I believe. So I'm going to keep that in or whatever. But mentors really help me with that kind of feedback and help me think about like ways that I was presenting myself even. You know, I did a leadership training program and we had several kind of mentors and they gave feedback on everything, you know, the way you come across in presentations, those kinds of things. And And man, if you are willing to accept that feedback and to take it to heart and to take the stuff that feels right for you, there's really nothing that you can't do. But that part of it is important. And that's been a really important role for me, to take in that feedback and then to also give my mentors feedback on things, about ways that they could improve or ways that they're coming across, those kinds of things. All of that stuff can be helpful. And that takes some humility. It takes a lot of humility, but it also takes an openness and a willingness to really learn and grow, because that's the point. And if you're going to go into it to just have, a fancy person give you a reference, that's not really worth it. You really want people who are going to be able to talk about maybe even that part of the process, like, oh, I've seen her grow in this particular way. Those are the kinds of things that make or break your career. And, I'm going to wrap up with this, and I do have some questions for you guys, but I want you to just keep the questions coming, and think about experiences that you've had with mentors. Think about, when things have been good, when they haven't been, or what things you're unsure of about a mentor-mentee relationship. So one of the things that it's really important to me to acknowledge that it's important to think outside of the box in a lot of ways about mentorship. So obviously I'm a Black woman, and it's really helpful for me to have had someone like the amazing Gwen Ifill, who is in my industry, is a Black woman. There's some things I don't have to explain about my experience that she just understood. There are ways that I could just watch the way that she worked and navigated relationships, how she had high standards, but also was just like a fun boss to have. But the kind of person that you knew, if you came to a meeting with Gwen Ifill, you need to be ready, because she's going to have done her research. She's going to have read 5 newspapers by the time she came in. And so there is very much value in having someone from your demographic, from your background, with a lot of similarities that you might have, and who are within your industry. There's some things that they will be able to help connect you with, because they do the same kind of, work that you do. However, the way that things are set up in this country, it's also important to have people who are not like you, who might not be in your industry. So some of my strongest advocates, some of the people who have put my name forward for things that I didn't even know about until after the fact, are, older white men in really high positions of power. They are some of my strongest advocates. They're people that I know I could call today, and they would be willing to give advice and help me. And they're very invested in my success and in me as a person. And those are the kinds of relationships that you can't fake, right? Like, those are investments. A mentor-mentee relationship is like any other relationship that you need to make successful. So that's going to mean how you communicate with them, clear communication, open communication. And so I want to encourage people. So one of the things that happens is someone will find, like, say myself, I'll look at an organization and say, oh, I'm going to ask this really high level Black woman to be my mentor. And, maybe it doesn't work out, or that person's overwhelmed because a lot of people want her to be their mentor. You have to be willing to think a little outside the box. One of my mentors is a woman who is in no way affiliated with the industry. She's actually a coach who does executive leadership training. And it's actually very helpful for me to have someone who is not in the public media world. She doesn't work at NPR or PBS or any of those affiliations. She works in the business world. And so she thinks of things very differently. And that's been incredibly helpful. I was making a decision about, a position and whether or not to take it. And I called her and talked through it with her. And she knew me well enough, we've known each other for a couple of years, that she said she was able to ask the right questions of me. And so by the time we were done, I knew what my decision was going to be. She didn't tell me what to do, but she did ask me the right questions. And that was amazing. And I'm still really grateful to her for that. And so this goes back to the other idea of that these relationships can be developed through formal programs and organic relationships. I think if you probably sit back a little bit and think about the people who are in your sphere, you might already have people who are serving in the role as mentors that you just don't think of it in that way. And just by thinking of it in that way and maybe having a conversation about that with them and saying, is it okay if I come to you with some questions or, thoughts or concerns that I have, that, it could develop into that kind of relationship. Because the other thing is, you're not always going to know necessarily what you want to do next, but you can have someone who can help you think through that process. The other thing is, it doesn't have to be super time intensive for it to be meaningful. It just has to be the time that you put into it, you really invest and really pay attention. And so I have several of those where I just check in every once in a while and I just keep people up to date and they send me information or say, there's something that this might be interesting to you. I also have people that, I was assigned to in formal programs. And interestingly enough, mostly those people aren't people that have necessarily lasted beyond the program, but they had a particular role in that, say year or so of the program, and they connected me to other people. And so for me, no relationship is a wasted one. Because there's some things that you're not going to be able to force those kinds of things. You will notice that things will just develop organically sometimes, and those end up being the ones that are long lasting. There are people who have been mentors for me for since, for example, I worked at Washington Week, which was more than 10 years ago, and I still feel like I can talk to them. And then also there are people who've changed who were really integral at some point in my career. And now we're just not as in touch anymore. But still relationships that are, I think, important. So there are situations for the next one where it's important to establish expectations and deadlines or things like that. If it's part of a formal program, if there's some deliverable you have, you can't expect that people are just going to take that on themselves or know that themselves. It's really important that you do the work that it takes to have that communication. This is the case a lot of times in academia or other things, but I wanted to keep this here as well because sometimes it's, you want someone to look over something for you. People will do this to me like, oh, can you take a look at this? I want to send this whatever resume, let's say, but I'm like, my week is packed. Well, in that case, it's going to be really hard for me to find the time to do that. So having that communication is important. I do, I'm conscious of the time. I think people are still sending questions. If you have questions, that's where I'm headed now. But I really just want to say that think about the role that you will play in any mentor-mentee relationship. Think about what you bring to the table. Think about what you want to gain from it and how you're going to contribute to that. I love being able to work with people who I can tell are excited and willing to put in the work that it takes, because if someone gives you a recommendation, I mean, honestly, usually when people have questions for me, there's like a book that I tell them to read that was, you know, very life-changing for my career that I would recommend. You know, you want people who are going to invest in that way. So I think I want to say that I know it can feel like it could be scary to think about, like, oh, I don't want to ask someone to be my mentor. You'll be lucky sometimes that it'll just happen. But also, don't be afraid to reach out to people. I think knowing why you want to reach out to them, what you feel like you can bring, what they can bring is really important. But I promise you that developing mentorships and sponsors who can help propel your career, put your name forward for things, are going to be really critical for your success. It's equally important as, you know, what you know. So I do, you know, want to hear from you. If there are people who, I think we only have a couple more minutes, but, you know, what relationships you've had with mentors, and have you been a mentor yourself? Like I said, you know, I'm mentor, mentee as well. So why don't I end there and just see if any other questions come back. No, someone just asked, should you send your mentor gifts or tokens of appreciation? No one has ever asked me that question before. I have never done that. I have sent things like thank you notes or cards. By the way, people love handwritten letters and notes. It sets you apart from just an email. And this person said, especially after a letter of recommendation. You know, I think, so I've also received gifts. I think it just depends. I think you would have to know what feels appropriate. There are people, if I know them really, really well, I would have no problem with doing that. But there's some, you know, I think maybe formal relationships where that might feel a little weird. So I think you would have to judge the relationship that you have with your mentor. You know, I've had people bring me something back from the country that they're from or something like that. And that's been fine. And I appreciate that. I think you just have to be just really thoughtful about what that is and who you're sending it to. But yeah, handwritten letter or note, that's my go-to. And I think it's really important. It shows that you took the time, you cared enough to take the time to do that. And it does make you stand out. Yeah, and I think the last thing I want to say is that I want you to feel encouraged about the opportunities that are out there when you find a really great person or a few great people to connect with. It can be life-changing and career-changing, and it's really worth the investment. So thank you, guys.
Wonderful. Shireen, thank you so much for that. I mean, the tips are incredible, super important, I think, for both, right? If you are seeking a mentor and as a mentee, some of those best practices. I know you shared kind of one of my pet peeves, which is when you might not have heard from a student or someone who you worked with for a long time, and then the only times that they reach out to you, or when they need something. They need a
Yeah.
recommendation, or they need, you know, especially because, of course, with my students, you know, graduate applications and jobs, and can I put you down as a reference? And I don't mind, but I do try to remind them that, you know, we are all people.
Yeah.
We're all people, and it doesn't take much. I've actually incorporated in one of my my classes, just literally like email etiquette. I don't think people realize how important it is.
Yeah, very much so.
Like a greeting. Hello, how are you? Before you dive into your
before you say, here's what I need. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, how would you feel just in your life as a friend if you haven't heard from them forever and they were like, can I have $500? You'd be like, no, I'm a little offended by that.
Hold up. So I try to remind my students all the time. I mean, so much of your information and wisdom was so wonderful. The importance of being personable, and that mentee mentor relationship should be reciprocal.
Absolutely.
In some way, and it's not all about how can I pull from you, how can I get a reference, how can I get a letter of rejection, how can I learn from you. I tell my students all the time, also my favorite phrase, Google is free 360. Some of the stuff they be emailing me, I'm like, there are no stupid questions. I don't believe in that model. There are no stupid questions, but there are questions that you probably should have asked yourself first before you ask somebody else. So it's not a stupid question, but ask yourself first, is this something I could look up? Is this something that is easily available? I have students all the time who are like, what classes do you teach?
Right.
That information is so plastered on like 5 different web pages. I don't have the time to answer to it drives me crazy. So I'm so grateful for your wisdom and input right now. I'd love to know quickly before I let you go. But right now, who are some of your who is, if you can share, who is a mentor right now to you? I don't know if you can share that.
Well, what I can share is, because people wouldn't know who they are anyway, but what I can share is like the kinds of positions that they're in.
Sure.
So I have people who are, for example, at the like vice president's C-level at PBS, for example, and at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting that works with us a lot. I also have people.
Lawson.
Would you say?
Shout out to Jennifer Lawson, one of my favorite people.
Oh, one of the best people ever. So those are the kinds of positions. And I want to say this too. There are people who are like general managers at public media stations because, there was a point in my life where I thought, that's exactly what I want to do. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run a station, obviously. And so actively reached out to people in those positions to hear from them, to make that decision about whether or not that really is what I would like to do in life. The answer to that is no, ma'am. But you don't know that until you have those conversations and build those relationships. So those are the kinds of relationships that I have now, are in kind of those like, what's the next step? Yeah. But also, I will say the name of one of my mentors, because she is not in the industry. Her name is Sue Hodgkinson, and she actually wrote a book that I recommend to everyone. It's called The Leader's Edge. And it really transformed the way I thought about myself in work. And it's something I recommend to students and young professionals all the time. And she's someone who, she and I just clicked. And, those are the things you can't fake. Those are the things, those relationships. So Sue Hodgkinson is one of my favorites, and she's not in this business. She and I don't have a whole lot alike, except that we're both INFJ, and that's about it.
Love it. Such amazing wisdom. Sharine, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your presentation and all the wisdom that you imparted.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's great. And good luck to everyone who's on this chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Wow. Wow, that was good. That was good. I as usual, learned a lot. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure to be able to curate this content, share these 5 master classes with you, bringing in industry leaders, giants, and professionals who are doing absolutely incredible things in their own right. I hope you notice some of the connections here, and of course that we are going to always, in true to the March on Washington Film Festival motto and their mission statement, we're always going to bring to you individuals who are engaging, compelling, and also just doing extraordinary work. So whether that be last night where we had Grace Lee, independent filmmaker and producer, whose current work and She Could Be Next, the 2-part PBS series, who then also works with Asad Mohammed, who does impact work as well with POV, PBS's long-standing award-winning documentary series. They're in their 33rd season this year, 33 years that they have been highlighting some of the most amazing and impactful stories in the business. Today, we had Jeremy Kaplan of CUNY Graduate School, and he was wonderful, explaining a lot of entrepreneurial journalism and tips in which you can remain active, engaged, and creating important content. So whether it be blog posts or podcasts, hopefully you picked up some great tips there. Then we had Lindsay Geschow, who does impact strategy work with the Ray-Ban Group, and she shared her most recent film that she's working with, which is called All In, the Fight for Our Democracy, which, as I mentioned, is going to be featured here at the March on Washington Film Festival tomorrow. So please make sure all those with those festival passes that you check that out. You can check it out at any point, but in particular tomorrow will be our screening and discussion. And then last but definitely not least, we had Shireen Stanford coming in and discussing mentorship and the importance of finding mentors. I have mentors. I am a mentor, but it's always important. My mentors, as she mentioned, have shifted throughout the course of my career, whether it be directly in the entertainment, news, business and industry, or now as an educator. Always having, and a lot of them sometimes are my peers. I do rely on a lot of my peers, especially my peers who are out publishing and doing other work. I lean on them and support them in ways that I can. Thank you all so much for joining us. It has been an absolute pleasure. I hope you learned a lot. This is going to live here. So come back, reference different things, grab different resources for yourself, and continue to stay engaged. I want to again give a shout out to all of our sponsors, everyone who supports the work that we have been doing for the last 2 days, and also for all the years that the March on Washington Film Festival has been around. Please make sure that you are engaging with all of the robust content that we have available. Everything, also kind of the joy in one instance of having a virtual festival is that our content is available on demand. So you can watch films and leading discussions and roundtables at your leisure with your family and friends around the world. So thank you very much for joining us. Stay tuned, stay engaged. We have some more amazing programming this evening, as well as tomorrow and Sunday. And we might be, I think I heard a little birdie told me that they'll be extending the festival for another week. So that means that if you did miss something, or you might not have had time to fit it into your very busy schedule, that you will able to do that again. So thank you all very much. Stay blessed, stay informed, and make sure you have a plan to vote. Take care.
Well, no, somebody's calling.